Welcome, everyone, to episode 7 of Maester Monthly, your favorite podcast hosted by the moderators of the Song of Ice and Fire subreddit. Just as a warning, this podcast is spoilers extended, which means it can include information from every aired episode of Game of Thrones and all of the Winds of Winter sample chapters. You have been warned. I am one of your hosts, Michael, better known as Bookshelfstud.
And I am another one of your hosts, Eliana, also known as Glass Table Girl.
And I'm another one of your hosts, JoeMagician, also known as Matt.
Now, for the first time ever, we're joined by a very special guest who we're super happy to have on. Everybody say hello to Manu, aka my nuclear bomb from Twitter.
Hi.
Hey guys, what's going on?
Hey.
I'm also guessing in your long, illustrious list of guest hosts, I'm the first one that doesn't actually have a Reddit presence, so...
Yeah, it's a little weird.
But fun story about that, actually, is I may not be on Reddit. I was actually the #1 trending topic on Reddit one night for a Song of Ice and Fire related material. What happened is one of my random Twitter friends found me on Facebook, and he checked out my Facebook profile picture, which is a picture of me from the CBS News being interviewed about the movie, The Interview, that was pulled, the Seth Rogen one. And essentially he edited in fake, subtitling on the captioning, and it was basically me playing Marry Kill with Sansa, Marjorie, and Daenerys. And I think if you do follow me on Twitter, you do know I have a really soft spot for Natalie Dormer and Marjorie Tyrell, but...
It's very soft.
That might be the opposite of it, but this is off to a great start. But anyways, he reached out to me. He's like, dude, a bunch of my friends are saying I should post your profile picture to Reddit, and it doesn't really have any personal information on it. It actually spelled my name wrong. It's like Manew.
Nice.
Truly Manu.
Yeah, so he posted it, and then about 3 hours later, I was getting people walking by from the office, a text to my phone, and post on my face was like, dude, you're #1 on Reddit right now. And then it turned out it was, my profile picture, because no one really knew what it was or whatever. But so that was a pretty wild time.
That was a big day.
It's all been downhill from there.
Well, I don't want you to lead into that, just because that was also the day of my first date with my girlfriend now of 2 years. And I had to explain to her that, sorry, my phone is blowing up. I'm the #1 trending topic on Reddit. But luckily she's fairly, she's as online savvy as I am. So at least she knew what that meant, because I've had to explain that before, so.
That does bring you into a pretty good group with us, because I think we've all had to explain to our significant others or family or friends why we can't talk to them at the moment because Reddit's blowing up on our phone.
Yeah.
So we all, you're part of the club. You've had that happen to you.
Yes, Reddit has also ruined my life. I can confirm that.
Oh.
Wow, this is
Yeah, we're definitely in that club.
Oh.
This is now the Maester Monthly sad Reddit story ever.
This is the weeping. The weeper.
The weeper.
Throwback.
So yeah, most of my stuff you can find at my nuclear bomb. I usually tweet out most of my thoughts, and most of them are Game of Thrones related. I'm also rewatching all of Game of Thrones. We're at A Scene of Ice and Fire. And I also have various write-ups related to Game of Thrones and other pop culture at draysbay.com and screenfellows.com.
Before we jump into the rest of the podcast, we're going to have a lot of good subreddit highlights for you, featuring some of the best catches, nicest posts, all that. We're also going to talk a lot about Season 7. Now that it's been a while since Season 7 ended, we're going to do a nice recap, look back at some of the big moments, and talk about some of the things that made Season 7 stand out. But before we get to all of that, we have an important discussion question, and each of us has to answer it as seriously and capably as we are able. If you had to kill Peter Baelish, aka Littlefinger, how would you do it? Matt, go first. It's random. I'm gonna pick
man, why'd you do
people
that? You put me on the
last.
spot. Well, if I had to kill Littlefinger, I think I would do it the way it's foreshadowed in the books. Cut his head right off, put his head right on top of the gates of Winterfell, like from Sansa's playtime with Sweet Robin. I think that's the way to go. The Starks cut off heads. That's their thing.
Or they get their heads cut off. Yeah,
none of this coming from behind and slitting throats crap. You cut off that head and you do it yourself.
Wow, that's bold. Eliana, what about you?
I feel like it's not bold because mine is like similar so I was listening to the Radio Westeros cast on Littlefinger a long time ago. So Lady Gwyn had this really interesting idea. She's pointing out how like Brienne being in the service of Sansa means that one of the wielders of ice, Oathkeeper has returned to Sansa's service, and then she was saying that somehow it would be awesome if like Widow's Wail made it to Sansa, and Sansa might be like a widow by that time, and she could use that to behead Littlefinger.
Probably.
And it would be apt to use Ned Stark's sword to behead the man who betrayed Ned Stark.
Whoa.
And so, yeah, Lady Gwyn's like really great.
Synergies.
So your answer is just Lady Gwyn's answer.
It's my answer with a specific sword, is what you're saying.
Well, yes.
But you had the Gates of Winterfell thing. That's
that's
your
thing.
thing.
Well, it makes me think of the Gates of Winterfell. I guess you said it was like a Robert Aaron thing, but it also reminds me of like the last chapter of A Game of Thrones, where Sansa's taken to like the top of the King's Landing, and Joffrey's like, "Oh look, it's your father's head," and like I guess that was like in vogue, I guess, back then, putting heads on display.
It's a classic wooing technique. Hey, look at your dad's head. Let's date.
Yeah.
You're saying Oathkeeper and Widow's Wail, would she use them like scissors? Just like
I know,
one on top
I
of
think
the
she
other?
was saying just one of them because it would be like smaller.
So not like a
That's easier for
Dooku
her to
kind of
wield.
Count Dooku.
That's what I was
RIP
kind of
internet.
hoping for.
Yeah.
You like duct tape them together and just go to town.
That's not what Manu, what about you? How would Littlefinger die?
I'll do something instead of going from the book. I'll take the show here, and that asshole took the time to count every blade that's on the show's Iron Throne. I want that thing melted down and him stabbed by each one, making sure that it doesn't kill him until I think he said it's not even 200.
It's like 100 and
yeah,
stabbed by like 190 something old swords.
Right. I want
rusty swords.
That very useless labor that he put himself through. I want that to come and pay off. So
yeah, I mean, because he had to walk around it, right? He couldn't just stand there. He had to like get up close and count.
He had like a notebook. He's like 1, 2, 3.
You need like
really
Post-its for each one or something.
Yeah, right.
They definitely
took
had
a little
Post-its.
red Sharpie, marked them.
He like drew a little. He took a picture, then he just counted. Yeah, they don't have this stuff.
Yeah, right.
He used his camera phone.
Yeah, it came with the teleporter. It's part of the kit. Well, I gotta say, if Littlefinger was to die by my hand, I think it would probably be throwing him off of a ship. I know that doesn't necessarily tie into too much with him, but
Sir Dantos?
I just think he deserves it. Also, Sir Dantos.
Yeah, that's a good one.
He, leaves him to die in Blackwater Bay, so he deserves it. But yeah, mostly it's just because I think it would be really funny to sort of like pratfall. Like he put a banana peel on the deck and he like slips and flies into the narrow sea, and then like not pretend to throw him a rope, but not actually throw him a rope. I would have a lot of fun with it, I guess is what.
Or
I'm
you
saying.
could just like push him off as though you're pushing him out the moon door and be like, only not Littlefinger. insert other person's name here. Only Aegon.
What?
Well, that was my other idea. If I was going to do a show-based death, would be, he said chaos isn't a pit, chaos is a ladder. So just find a really big pit, which I think the moon door would probably qualify as the biggest pit or whatever.
Yeah.
This is Westeros.
Just kicking backwards. Yeah. Yeah, that would work pretty well, I think.
These are all good ways to kill him, yeah.
Yeah, right. If you, dear listener, have any suggestions on how to kill Littlefinger, well, don't send them to the Game of Thrones writers, because they've already taken care of that. You can send them to Santa Fe, New Mexico, to George R. R. Martin's house, We have his address. DM us. We don't have his address. Don't DM us asking for his address.
I mean, you can DM us if you want, just not about that.
Goes down in the deal.
So it's been a while since we did a real podcast, and as such, it's been a while since we did a real subreddit highlights. So thankfully, the noble people of the subreddit have been posting all sorts of great stuff. And we'd be remiss if we didn't let our guest have his right, if we didn't let him have guest right and go first. So Manu, there's a post for you to share with us, correct?
Yes, why, thank you for the bread and salt here. And this is called The Season of Jon Snow's Love by user Silver Sherry or lower percentage Silver's Harry. But either way,
I like that one better.
Yeah.
So, I'm actually going to admit I really like this mostly because this is a song from A Song of Ice and Fire that really is not on my radar. It's not, The Rains of Castamere or The Dornishman's Wife. Like, I wouldn't have named the song if you asked me to name songs from A Song of Ice and Fire. So, anyways, the idea is that, Tyrion associates this Mirish song called The Seasons of My Love with Tysha, and it kind of walks through the seasons, summer, fall, and winter, at least as far as we know. We've only gotten, I think, 3 references specifically to it, or at least this post highlights 3 of them. And what it posits is that this song actually applies to Jon Snow and his 3 loves, quote unquote. And you can factor those to be Ygritte, Val, and Daenerys. And, they're lovers of hypothetical and questionable at this point right now in, as far as we know, through 5 books, but they're definitely 3 people that people, can see Jon getting with.
Yeah. Right.
So without much more preamble, basically, the first reference is a quote from Catelyn 7 in A Clash of Kings, where she goes, she could hear the faint chords of some love song drifting up from the yard, so sad and sweet. I loved a maid as red as autumn, Raimon sang, with sunset in the air. That is supposedly a reference to Ygritte, who was, famously kissed by fire, autumn, red hair. She died in his arms, which is kind of the evidence that, sad and sweet is what Catelyn describes the song as. So, I think that, is a very logical comparison right there. And then I think, I'll move on to the next one here, which is from Tyrion 6, A Clash of Kings. So again, same book for whatever that's worth. And this is this the Cersei that Jaime sees? When she smiled, you saw how beautiful she was, truly. I loved a maid as fair as summer, with sunlight in her hair. And this is supposedly describing Val. I think sunlight in her hair, is interpreting it to be blonde in this case. And I think Val is described as very beautiful, like possibly the most beautiful woman on the continent. And that's also which is also both descriptors for Cersei Lannister as both, or at one time, the most beautiful lady on the continent or Westeros or what have you. Yeah, they note that radiant and fierce are ways to describe the sun and sunlight, and both Val, she has presence when she's there, people know she's there. She usually has something thoughtful to say.
She doesn't take any guff. Yeah.
No guff allowed.
And to that point, and I think at this point the user is kind of, because Val's a more tenuous relationship for Jon than say Ygritte was, where they openly copulated. And here we see that he references, or I don't know the gender of this person, so I won't assume, but the user references Jon 11 from A Dance with Dragons, where a ghost emerged from between the 2 trees with Val beside him. They look as though they belong together. And I think, the transitive property of Jon is ghost is Jon. The idea that one can stand in for the other symbolically, basically anywhere you want.
The idea that Val's into ghosts and not into Jon.
Ooh, that is a plot twist. Ghost, no, get away from her.
Well, I'm also only into people's dogs, not their humans. I'm like, I can't deal with this human.
Oh, yeah.
Bad dog, down.
Wow, this got weird. Maybe the third shocking thing that George told David and Dan was that there's bestiality in the last act of Game of Thrones. So
you heard it here first, folks.
Yeah, maybe.
This is new tinfoil.
Anyways, getting back to the actual post, because I don't want to take away from this user's fire. The final quote referencing the Mirish song, Seasons of My Love, is from Tyrion 10, A Clash of Kings. So I guess, again, all three of the main quotes about the song are in A Clash of Kings. Shay stood in the door behind him, dressed in the silvery robe he'd given her. I loved a maid as white as winter, with moon glow in her hair. Moon glow in her hair may be taken to refer to silver hair or white hair, which is, generally a descriptor for Daenerys' hair in this case. And I'm guessing, I don't think shipping Jon and Dany or assuming that their paths are going to cross is that far out there, show or not. I think that was pretty much something people saw coming. So, and especially with Daenerys having her own visions of, Jon or a blue rose in the wall and all that stuff. So basically, that's, there's a connection there. And it also is a reference to the fact that Jon and Daenerys will, if they do meet, which we presume they will, in winter. And, kind of going through Jon didn't meet Val in the summer, but it was, the autumn when him and Ygritte met. And because the summer quotes kind of referencing summer, Jaime and Cersei, you can kind of see the connection. Theirs as being more of a summer love, a carefree love, because you don't care about the incestual repercussions of it.
It's just so
very carefree.
I'm really stretching on this one, but I think this is less a theory, but more, I think the user admits that we only know 3 verses of the song. We haven't gotten this song in a, blocked out section like we have, like the Reigns of Castamere or some of the other songs it is, what more is there to the song? There is notably no rhyme or verse for spring yet. We also don't have a book in spring. We don't have a book, at all, but I'm specifically referencing A Dream of Spring, is coming out.
Right.
So basically, I think this is more not necessarily a fully formed theory, but more, hey, there's a couple parallels here, and it might be actually building to something in Winds or Spring. Both of the last 2 books have a season in its name or whatever. So specifically, one point I really did like was the user pointed out how it does kind of parallel as well Dany's, 3 loves you must ride, or 3 mounts you must love, or whatever the phrasing is there. Not mounts you must love, that's more bestiality. But
boy,
what's going on here?
No, okay, to be fair,
it's the bestiality hour with
the second to the last Dany no one needs to know this, never mind.
You mean the one where she rides Drogon and there's the heat between her legs?
Yeah, and she's like, the heat between her legs, and she's like, yes, take me higher! And I'm like, oh, Dany, chill.
Whoa, I didn't read it that way.
User Deutscherhawk is the one who actually pointed that out to me, so...
How often do you read this post to know that name?
Deutscherhawk's a nice fellow. Shout out to Deutscherhawk.
See, I actually read that scene as, the Creed song Higher, so basically Daenerys sounded like Scott Stapp to me, like, I'm not going to pretend to imitate his... voice. Me heart. But I imagine Daenerys turned into a baritone, just for that one delivery in my headcanon. So
absolutely,
that's lovely.
That's gonna be when the annotated version of the series comes out. That's George's annotation there. No, I really liked this post because it, like you've been saying, it's it's not necessarily a fully fledged theory, but it's nice thematic evidence that exists in there that, if someday these things came true, we could turn around and say, hey, look, there was this kind of cool thematic parallel earlier in the story with the seasons and all that. And especially with Val, there was that whole thing about she's married to the man who captures her, right? Who takes her from Jarl, from her first husband. And she believes, right, that Jon took her from Jarl? Is that correct? I can't quite remember.
She keeps daring Jon to actually take her.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know, even if nothing more happens there, you could kind of say that there's at least this playful relationship between them already, if not a fully fledged copulation.
Well, playful's a strong word. She does threaten to cut off his junk if he tries to get too close. Flirting. Everyone does that.
Because she's interested in ghosts, not in Jon.
This is correct.
Oh wait, maybe that's how it's gonna go down. Because Jon in the books is currently dead, and as we know from the A Dance of Dragons prologue, which is not as highlighted in the show, we know that, the skin changers live a second life in their animals, so it's gonna be Jon in Ghost hanging out with Val.
Jon in Ghost.
Oh, man.
In Val. And
No.
Maester Monthly, everyone.
I was hoping nobody was going to go there, and instead we raced to go there.
our long hiatus has totally been worth it.
Oh my god.
Sorry for the hiatus, we're back.
One point the user said was that Val might have the most interest in Jon, and I was thinking, where's Melisandre on this scale? Because it might be colored by the show, but I don't think I think she has her own machinations on Jon. I don't know if they're as sexy time as Val's per se, but
I agree.
what do we think? I might be thinking too much of the show at this point, but
we don't know what color Melisandre's hair really is. She could be the spring person. She dyes it, so who knows what it really is at this point.
I mean, the summer sun could be red at sunset, so...
Mm-hmm.
She also comes on to Jon before Jon dies in the show, and now Jon's dead in the books.
Necrophilia? Is that where you're going with this?
Well, okay, I mean, it's the kiss of fire, right? To bring Beric back. So it doesn't. I mean,
That's
I'm not
true.
actually saying full blown necrophilia. I'm saying this sort of like loving, like Thoros loved Beric and brought him back. Not even necessarily in a romantic way, in just like this deep feeling way. So, there's a lot of breadth to the human experience and
Oh my god,
deep relationships.
Breath.
there's
not
a lot
bread.
of bread too.
Yeah, there's many kinds of bread in the world.
Yeah, there's a lot of bread.
And George described them all.
Yeah, that's
to go
his
back
research
to this post though, they posed the question that do we think there will be a spring love for Jon, and if we do, who do you think it could be? Like, how would you even determine that? Because there doesn't seem to be a lot of there are some
Arya.
tenuous connections here where it's like, oh my god, but like summer to blondes, I mean yellow, I guess, but then I don't know.
Green for spring, thus he's going to marry a child of the forest.
Or
maybe
Willa Manderly.
Wyla
Yeah.
Manderly.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Is Aaron Greyjoy's hair green from all the seaweed that he has strung through it? Dark horse
Kind
contender, Jon Spring Love, Aaron
I think
Greyjoy.
so. I think it's likely. Yeah.
I think we can go there. Or also a
There we
Tyrashi.
go.
So Jon's gonna
We'll
fall
call
in
it-
love with
With
just some guy from
Aegon?
Tyrash.
And the Aegon ship.
Oh,
Finally.
Aegon's
At
Square,
last.
yes.
Oh my god. The egg scramble that was promised.
Wow.
2 eggs over easy.
I know this girl who is dating a boy with the same name as her. So.
Oh, is it like a Chris and a Chris or something? Or you don't have to say the names. Never mind. That's.
I was gonna guess Walter and Walter.
See, I was just barely getting used to the idea of damp snow when you brought up the idea of 2 eggs over easy. So
Ooh, yeah.
There's so many ships coming out of this.
yeah,
And all of them to
God.
shove Littlefinger off.
I do inject a lot of horniness into the fandom, so I do think that's, kind of par for the course.
we brought you on this podcast for a reason.
We knew what we were getting into.
We just wanted to blow up our iTunes, our ability to be on iTunes. So,
Losing that not safe for work tag.
yeah, exactly. We're gonna get the explicit tag now.
oh, this is me. All right, great post called Sam of Hornhill. And essentially the post goes through a lot of the imagery of the Tarly family and their castle, Hornhill, talks about the history of the Tarleys, which I never really knew before, about Harlan the Hunter and Herndon of the Horn, talking about the Tarleys being from twins and one being more martial and the other one who's, I don't know, more musical. They didn't say that. But, like, the
More
horn.
horny.
One's more martial, the other's more horny. Which is, like, a big part of Sam's Feast story. And then they talk about the Tarly sigil, where it's a hunter who also has the horn, and then how there's 3 important horns. And then how there's 3 important horns that are presented in the story. Dragonbinder, Mance's horn that was burned by Mel, and the fabled Horn of Joramun, or Horn of Winter. And basically they're asserting that with Sam's pedigree as a Tarly, Samwell Tarly is going to use the Horn of Winter to wake giants from the earth. Now, I don't necessarily know, and it's not necessarily asserting that Sam blowing the horn will bring down the wall, just using the Horn of Winter to wake the giants from the earth. So I thought this was a really interesting post, with the way it broke all that down, like, because I hadn't really considered it being Sam before, even though we know that he's carrying maybe that little horn found on the Fist of the First Men with him. Other fun facts, so I had shared this post on Twitter, and the author actually responded to it, so if you want to follow that author, he's on Twitter at Loki President, and you can also find him on his Tumblr that he linked in the post of Gods of Terror. But yeah, so what do y'all think about this?
So I do think that it did bring up a lot more horn imagery built into the Tarly mythos, or whatever you wanted, their history. Honestly, I never thought of Horn Hill as referring to a horn. I don't know what I thought of it as. I just thought it was alliteration and sounded cool, so that's why. I mean, I always thought that Sam's horn is whatever, the Horn of Jaruman or the Horn of Winter. But, like the, horn on the sigil, like I had never noticed that. I haven't looked that closely at the Tarly sigil. I knew it was a hunter, but like all his effects and accessories and, you know, full sleeve tattoos that he might have, I was not aware of. But, I mean, I liked it. I think it really just kind of paints an entire picture of, hey, Sam's whole, like, origin backstory is, like, steeped in stuff related to horns, and I think it's very subtly done, because other than Sam carrying the horn, I didn't really have any association, like I said. So I really like it, and I think it just kind of feeds more into things I already believed, but I mean, providing more evidence is, you know, fleshing out a more complete picture of it.
Totally.
I always thought Horn Hill was named after everyone knows about the huntsman part of his sigil. I thought it was like from hunting, like trophies and stuff like that. Like, oh, it's Horn Hill because they shot down so many elks. They made a giant hill out of it or something weird like that. I had never known all any of this.
Well,
This is, I think I agree with that. Although, I still don't think the Horn of Winter does what people think it does. I think that's fake. I think that's fake news. I don't think it's going to do much. Come at me.
What I kind of liked about this take on the horns is, if you go back to A Game of Thrones, when Sam introduces himself, like the first time we meet him, he says, "My name is Samwell Tarly of Horn," and then like introduces himself that way, which means George was kind of baking this identity into Sam from the get-go. Like, this wasn't something he would come up with while writing Feast and go, "Oh, you know, I should do something with the horns. That would be cool." Like, Samwell Tarly has always been horn hit. Like, that's all, that association's always been there. So if it's going to play into the end game for Sam's story, then I think it makes sense, because it's been there the whole time. You know, it's not some sort of weird element that popped up late in the books and doesn't really make much sense to read into. It's clearly baked into who he is.
yeah, and some of the comments bring up a good point too. Like, I know the top comment, Cynical Classicist, quotes how this might be applicable from, like, you know what you were saying, because Sam introduces himself as from Horn Hill, and from the beginning of the books, they're talking about how he joins the Night's Watch, and in the oath, it says, "I am the fire that burns against the cold, the light that brings the dawn, the horn that wakes the sleepers, the shield that guards the realms of men," blah, 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 blah. And then they're saying that maybe, like, Sam is the horn that needs to warn the south that the others are coming.
Yeah, that works. I mean, yeah, because it's still baked into that Night's Watch thing, and you sort of have all of the Night's Watch guys doing different aspects of the vow, I think. Like, maybe John is going to be the fire burning against the cold, and someone's the shield that, and not in a literal, not necessarily very literally, but just parts of that vow are going to show up through people's stories. And Sam makes sense to be the horny one.
Yeah.
It also works in Tolkien's works. The horn of Gondor and the horns of the Rohirrim are very important parts of those books, and how they signal the charge for battle. Like, Boromir blows it when he's going down, kind of like Waymar Royce in a little bit.
Yeah.
If the South all goes charging north, Sam might be the first guy to blow it, and that could be like a really cool callback to a series that George loves a lot.
Right. Yeah, I was thinking the giant one that Gimli blows at Helm's Deep,
That
like
too,
the horn
yeah.
of Helm
Yeah.
Hammerhand or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah, I that's something I had never really thought about. Was the fact that Sam could be blowing the horn to warn the Seven Kingdoms or rally the I don't know exactly what I thought was going to happen with it, but I always assumed it was more tied to what Mance assumes it was, either that it would, bring the wall down and or wake giants from the dead. I was always more just it blow the horn, the wall might come down. I kind of do like what poor Quentin's theory on this, how with Euron heading towards Old Town, that he might fall in possession of the horn and blow it and what that might mean or whatever. But
Right.
I really like Sam, and I feel like this would be a great kind of role for him to play out or whatever. Especially considering where he started from in A Game of Thrones. You said it's baked into his origin story, from right away. And, he's, probably progressed or, come from, pissing himself every turn to, having accomplished quite a bit and traveled across the world. So, I like it.
Yeah.
Also,
Yeah.
Sam has some interesting icons about him throughout his life now. If you wanted to look at Game of Thrones or Song of Ice and Fire, looking back like 5,000 years in the future from the end of the story, well, Sam's the Slayer and he's the Hornblower. You might end up like someone like Tormund, who just has all these titles and nobody knew he was just like this dork that pissed himself all the time.
Yeah.
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 I like that. Sam the Slayer, Sam the Hornblower. Yeah.
He might get more, who knows? Slayer of Lies? I like that one.
And and then you can picture him, they'll depict him as having the Horn of Winter slung over him and Heartsbane at his side, even maybe.
Oh, yeah. A
Like,
giant Horn of Winter.
He'll be valorized into this great knight leader or hero. So,
It's always nice to think that George is aware of this stuff and he's setting it up in a way that, like, even with this post, they're talking about the origins of his house. I mean, they're depicted on their shield, on the sigils of the Tarleys as, like, like perfect guys, but they were probably like guys like Jon and Sam back in their time too. They just happened to be immortalized by their family.
right.
Yeah. Herndon Horn was probably not like that cool.
No,
I'm
he
just
probably
saying.
wasn't with a name like Herndon.
Yeah.
He was actually
Herndon.
probably the coolest.
What are you
I
trying
don't
to
know.
say?
Herndon is just such a terrible name.
Wow.
Try
Herndon's
Fairfax.
sex.
That's a better name.
Hernias are named after him.
Try Springfield.
It's a good name.
Try Springfield. That's a better name. So my post to bring to the table today is a post by user. It's probably Thomares? I'm not sure. It's like Ares Targaryen with a thom at the beginning.
Or Tom.
No.
Thomares or a Tom.
No.
Hard to say.
Marys?
Thamaris?
Thomares? Anyway,
Charizard, I choose
this
you.
post is yeah, their flair is Targaryen sigil. Charizard, I choose you. Anyway, this post is titled Sir Duncan the Tall's Skills When the Legend Meets Reality, which is a nice title right away. Got my attention. Good job. In A Storm of Swords, Jaime is reading through the White Book. He's thinking about all these great Kingsguard heroes, including Sir Duncan the Tall, a legendary figure, exalted company. I mean, we were just talking about these legendary figures of the Tarleys in their history. Dunk is that already. I mean, he's a legend. But as this user points out, after reading the 3 Dunk and Egg novellas, it becomes pretty clear that Dunk is not actually all that great of a fighter, at least not yet. He just sort of is like a good street brawler and basically beats trained knights by not cheating, but, kicking up dirt and, like, throwing elbows and stuff. Yeah, I mean, he's not, a finessed warrior. He's not Barristan Selmy or anything like that. This user also goes through his known accomplishments beyond the novellas. I mean, in the novellas, first off, he does beat Prince Aerion Targaryen and then, gets beaten up in the trial by 7. And then he loses his first tilt at the tourney at White Walls and almost dies fighting Lucas Longinch and, all these very close calls throughout the novellas. And then later in his life, he does personally slay Daemon III, Blackfyre. He defeats Lionel Baratheon single-handedly in one-on-one combat, which is pretty impressive. then loses a joust to Barristan Selmy, a 16-year-old Barristan Selmy, later in life. And as this user points out, damn, Duncan, did you ever work on your joust? Because,
nope.
yeah, he's not really good at all that knightly stuff. But what I liked about this post is that I think that's what George is going for. That's exactly what he's going for in the novellas, is that Dunk is not necessarily some sort of, great sword fighting wizard. He's just a big tough guy who, gets lucky a couple times and sort of fails upward sometimes, and through these accidents of history ends up being a very important person. So I liked this post that they pointed that out. So I was kind of wondering what you guys thought.
In some ways, I almost see a parallel to another Lord Commander, just because we bring him up right at the beginning, Jaime Lannister, as he is now. Jaime's not that strong, and now he has to learn how to fail upwards because he doesn't have any martial prowess. So how's he gonna do this?
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought that, I don't know, I thought this was interesting because we already know that Dunk is just kind of we know that Dunk has really high charisma stats, so he's
True.
able to get away with lying about being a knight, or and he is able to win over both sides in the mystery knight because of it.
True.
He's a hustler.
He is a hustler.
Oh wait, no, sorry, the sworn sword.
Yeah, right. Part of that is he's a big handsome guy, and in Westeros, if you're a big handsome guy, you already start a +10, right?
That's true.
You already got a leg up.
Yeah.
So he
can
sort of
right
coast
there.
on that a little bit. Yeah, exactly.
That's one of Duncan's primary skills. Doesn't he win one of his fights just because he's taller? Doesn't that happen?
Oh, at least once, yeah. Yeah, it's just him being so big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is the Brienne of Tarth.
Yeah.
That was Brienne's strategy during the jouster melee, right? During
the melee
fighting
at the bridge.
Or Loras?
Yeah, when she was fighting Loras, she's just I'm gonna be big, and
It won.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is why she's a descendant of Duncan the Tall.
The
Right.
connections.
Yeah. Exactly.
But I don't
It's all
think...
there.
is it fair to criticize a tall person for using their height to their advantage? Does that undercut their skill necessarily?
No.
Per se?
No.
No, yeah, exactly.
It is funny, when you were describing him, when you were kind of summarizing the post, I thought of Bronn, the way you talked about, kicking up dirt, and...
yeah.
He's definitely... there are a lot of opposites of knights in A Song of Ice and Fire, but they're all opposites in their own ways. Sandor Clegane is not like Bronn, per se. And I think Bronn kind of fits more of the hedge knight, kind of that Sir Duncan... The hedge knights are the right... Yeah, he's not a landed knight or whatever. So, alright, whatever. But, yeah, so I kind of see that as, the parallel of Sir Duncan the Tall. But, it could be a little bit, of both. Maybe he doesn't have all the skill, but... where that fails, his moxie makes up for it, or his ability to game the system. He's I know you mentioned his charisma stats or whatever, but from a sports game, it just he has those intangibles or whatever. You can't really quantify what skills he has, but
exactly. Yeah.
I also wonder if it's not fair to say that he just fails upwards. He has good charisma, but also while he doesn't always do the absolute lawful good thing, Dunk obviously is trying to do the right thing, and that's what we're shown in the Dunk and Egg stories, that Dunk, maybe he's not actually a true knight, but he embodies it the same way that Brienne embodies what it means to be a knight.
Yeah.
Or the commentary we're getting through Sandor Clegane, who may be another one of Dunk's progeny.
Ooh, maybe.
I don't think I've heard that
maybe.
spicy tinfoil.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah,
Brienne of
how do you
Tarth,
think...
Brienne of Tarth, we know for sure because of Balticon.
Yep. Another thing I like about Dunk is when you're comparing him to Brienne, a large part of the reason that we know him as an exalted character is because Aegon wanted to hang out with him and then continually take out the ring from the boot. And so Dunk got in with the right people and went high. But if you sort of see Brienne as his parallel, what would happen if Dunk didn't meet the right people? Would have ended up more along her path. Whereas it's sort of like a commentary a little bit on getting lucky and knowing the right people. And that's why we know Dunk is an amazing character, but most people don't know Brienne, even though they're probably comparable in terms of fighting skill and personality.
Yeah. Or even, I mean, to go with a contemporary of his, like Quentin Ball from the Mystery Knight, the kid who turns out to be like the son of whores, and it's not good. He could be Dunk. He's a pretty good fighter. He's not big, but he's got the skills and all that. He just doesn't have any wealthy friends, despite his efforts to try and make wealthy friends. And so maybe he'll pop up again in a future novella, who knows? But it kind of ends with him just going back to being some nobody, while Dunk still has his Targaryen buddies, and he ends the novella by chatting with Bloodraven and all that.
Yeah, who gets to talk to Bloodraven?
Exactly. I wish I could talk to Bloodraven.
Maybe we're all talking to Bloodraven all the time.
Manu?
Because
just
we
don't
all
know.
are Bloodraven.
Yes, we are all Bloodraven.
Boy.
That's right.
You could say the same thing a bit for Jaime. I mean, what would Jaime be if he wasn't a Lannister? He's kind of a dick. He's not particularly smart. His main skill is that he can kill people. He probably wouldn't go high in the world if he wasn't part of that family.
You gotta wonder.
He would go high enough, like Bronn.
But that's not like where he is known as the Kingslayer across everywhere and known as like the best swordsman alive in the day, except for Barristan.
Being the Kingslayer is not a good thing, though.
Well, it's infamous.
But he might have never been put in that position. He might have never been put in the position to be used against Tywin Lannister. And thus, he could have just lived a perfectly, like, chill, normal life.
Exactly.
Like, just digging up potatoes or something. Yeah.
Or been blown up if he lived in King's Landing, because who would have stopped Aerys? No one.
Well,
Is digging up potatoes what they call having sex with your sister? Is this like
that's what they call it in the Westernlands.
You're either mining gold or you're digging up potatoes.
They don't have potatoes. They don't have potatoes, though, do they?
In ASOIAF?
They shouldn't,
yes,
right?
they do. Don't they? They make stews.
Well,
you can't make a stew without potatoes.
It's a New World crop.
It is a New World crop. Okay, there's no potato in the books. I'm doing a search by some fire.
Oh.
What about taters?
You're right.
What's taters, Precious? Is there any other old English term for potato, like ladyfingers?
Neeps.
You know, those are like...
Oh, I never liked that name.
I thought those.
Does anyone know what a neep is?
Yeah, neep is like a turnip.
Yeah.
And then when they say corn, they're not necessarily referring to maize. They're referring to like barley corn, like the kernels.
Yeah. Yeah. No, they just have neeps, onions and neeps. Wow. Oh, I could go for some onions and neeps actually.
Come to the potluck. When we have one again.
Yeah.
Everybody, come to the potluck.
Oh yeah, right. Yep. That's right.
The internet.
Maester monthly potluck.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's not a monthly event. That's a misnomer. I wanted to say one last thing about this post, which was that there was a great comment down in the thread by Anth Ambassador, who points out that, or as they put it, Dunk just needs to be better than Gregor Clegane is. A good guy, and he's the paragon of what a knight should be. Clegane is never noted for being talented necessarily, just huge and brutal. That he's not necessarily some sort of, no one would describe Gregor Clegane as painting with red or whatever. He's just this huge guy who can hack people to pieces. So if Dunk is roughly his size, he doesn't have to be, Barristan Selmy or whatever to be a great fighter. He just has to have armor on and not be dumb, basically. Was their point. That his level of his skill floor is lower, I guess, or higher. I don't know.
Are you saying he just clears the bar? Is what you're saying?
I'm saying like his bare minimum is better than like a guy who's 5'2" but a really good swordsman. You know what I mean?
So he's tall enough to dunk, is what you're saying.
Oh my god!
He'd be a great NBA player.
Yeah. How did we go all this time talking about how huge he is without making like? Oh my god.
Well, we're nerds. Yeah. Manu likes sports.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Carrying
Manu
the
likes
whole team
sports.
on his back.
Oh god.
Maester Monthly first. No,
our potluck will be a baseball outing. We can.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Is that the one with the ball and the bat or something? Yeah.
Jeff and Jen like sports.
I do too.
I like sports, yeah.
You like sports?
Oh, you like sports? Name 3 sports. It doesn't really
Name 3 of their albums.
Name 3 sports ball players.
my god.
Alright, guys, so moving on from that, we have what was a super spicy take post-season. Like, this post blew up. It had, 2,482 upvotes. It had it got gilded 8 times. That's how spicy this take is. Everyone, get your milk ready. The title is Sansa's Bolton plotline 2 years later. What did it bring, and what did it rob us of?
Now, before we jump into this post, we do want to say, since it's discussing Sansa's plotline and the Bolton plotline specifically, we're going to get into some sensitive topic, including sexual assault.
Yeah, so essentially, it is, as with any spicy take, there's a lot in it. It's really long, so to try and put this as succinctly as possible, the user, the Murphy Sue, brings up that it's been 2 seasons since the Sansa Bolton arc, which was controversial, and, now that we've had time to see, a full arc, or a lot of the parts of that wrapped up, what did we actually get out of it? So they summarize, the things that happened. So, Season 5, Sansa gets handed over to the Boltons and is, Jane Poole's storyline is imposed onto her. At the end of Season 7, what we have after Sansa going through a lot of tough times in Seasons 5 and 6 is that she has many skills for running the North, which ends up feeling, the user says, like mixed messages, bad storytelling, callbacks, fan service, and miscommunication. Sansa ends up being portrayed as a competent leader, but we haven't seen the storyline for how she learned those skills. So the TLDR is, it's been 2 entire seasons and Sansa's rape has brought nothing to the table. It didn't change anything about Sansa as a player in the northern context, or as a character besides the harmful implication that it made her quote-unquote stronger. There is also a Season 5 shaped hole in Sansa's characterization that led viewers to being confused as to where her leadership skills come from because they weren't earned. It was officially just for shock value. So, this post had 847 comments. As we said, spicy take. What say you, fellow co-hosts?
It's, I think, a really, first off, well-written post. Just, it's long, it's very long, but kind of earns it. There's some really
unlike
nice
Sansa's
turns of...
storyline?
Oh, unlike Sansa's storyline. There's some really nice turns of phrase. They refer to the Northern Lords as trustworthy as a big green download button. Which is I love that. We should all be using that.
That's true, the download button should be small.
Sure.
Yeah, that's the official Maester monthly stance. And I just wanted to read this one paragraph from it because I felt like it really summed up a lot of the strongest points of this post. And it's going to be some spicy takes about the show, so just, hold on to your pants. The paragraph reads, "Rape is super realistic for this world, but something as context-shattering as Lyanna Mormont, 12-year-old girl from a minor house, bossing around grown men is fine. It's quote-unquote gritty realism when prominent characters being randomly raped, and not when the Westerosi Vatican is blown up with no consequence, when Ramsay kills his father with impunity, when Jorah is miraculously cured of grayscale by a novice using a knife and some cream, when Ilaria kills Doran in front of his guards with no consequence, when Jaime doesn't drown after the Field of Fire, when Arya is bleeding to death but doing parkour in Bravos. You don't get to pick and choose," they say. Quote-unquote, "the reality they live in is the reality they live in always or never. Choose." And so their point here is that with Sansa's plotline in Season 5, they went with this sort of thing, well, it's Ramsay and it's this horrible world and, this is what would happen. But that the rest of the story doesn't necessarily hold to that conceit. That you have these sort of maybe goofy's the wrong word, but, wildly unrealistic things happening, and yet they feel the need to stick to realism so hard in this one aspect of the story. And I think the what's the user's name? The Murphy Sue makes a really strong point there that, yeah, it's inconsistent. It is, in my opinion. So I that was my favorite paragraph from the whole piece. That and the download button line.
It's a good line.
I think it is 100%. I don't think there's anything necessarily either factually wrong or structurally wrong with the argument. I think everything that's asserted is pretty well argued. I guess I'll throw myself under the bus. I wouldn't say I defended it in the same terms that this user, brings up the main defenses of it. I think it's hard to really say this, but I think if we can step back for one sec, I think they generally handle the impact of violence well. Not all sexual violence. I think they have a couple major missteps. If you put Sansa aside, I think some of the stuff at Craster's Keep was, probably beyond what they should have done. The Jaime and Cersei sex scene was just basically a failure, execution, writing, however you want to read it. But I think at other times, the scars that some of these people, have borne over time, like it sticks with them. And I do think the show does lose the thread on that a little bit, especially as we get into the later seasons and the Saint Tyrions and the Saint Jorahs. So, I think one thing I would generally caution, and it's just, I don't think all of this should necessarily be laid at David and Dan's feet. I know David and Dan have become the kind of the what you say when you're referring to the show and the showrunners, and it basically seems to put and I think a problem is that they don't have enough women in the writer's room. And I think there's also, I mean, forgetting that, there's also just an issue of, some of the things just don't make sense just from an actual logical point, which the, point brought up. So I don't know. I think it's all a really earnest reaction. I am wary of the way they had Sansa kill Ramsay. Not necessarily that she did it, but it almost comes off as, something bad happened to Sansa and then she got the guy. Even though she mentions it after the fact, it almost, the way that they play that up, it's people kind of interpreted the end of Battle of the Bastards two ways. One, that, Sansa smiling kind of as she walked away was, yeah, Sansa, or hell, good job, Sansa, And then some people actually thought that, read that smile more darkly as this is Sansa becoming a little more evil, a little more cutthroat, and this isn't necessarily a positive turn for her character. I'd say the events of season 7, they try to generally paint her more as a good guy than not, when they can. So I don't actually even know where I'm going with that point, but, I don't know.
I do like what you said about not necessarily throwing the whole thing on Dan and David, because I don't want to do the thing where, I give them all the credit and they can't do anything wrong. But they were handed this storyline from George, which featured Jane Poole in the books, which completely different arc from Sansa's story, right? I mean, it's very different. But for very understandable story economy reasons, keeping characters in the same location, minimizing the amount of character spread, they wanted to put Sansa's story with an existing story. It's very easy to see the decision-making process that leads them to do that, even though I don't think they thought it all the way through and didn't necessarily carry the implications to what it should have been. But it, given the material they were handed, you can see exactly how they walked into that trap, basically. You know what I mean? How they stepped forward and wrote that. Which is too bad. It's too bad.
A ton of sense, when you think about it, it's just not a ton of sense, but I mean, in an economic sense now. So
which is the real shame, because they didn't. It did make a lot of sense economically, and yet makes no sense in terms of the storyline. So you sacrifice a main character really for the sake of bringing people together in one season.
Right. So I'm going to kind of turn this a little bit, and I'm going to go back to a crackpot I had back in season 3 when we saw the previews for episode 9 and kind of the previews for the Red Wedding episode. And we saw that Talisa was going to the twins for that. I had theorized on Twitter or wherever at that point that, hey, there's a chance that what if the Boltons actually take Talisa, the quote-unquote queen in the north, and make her Ramsay's bride or something along those lines. Forgetting all the implications and narrative things of that, does your interpretation of that scene, if they did the same exact thing with, they do the Simba Mufasa moment where Roose is like, this is all your land, everything that the light touches. Take him to Winterfell, reach still in tow.
That's amazing.
If it was Talisa, if they did something, what if they made Raz, the fake,
right?
Whatever.
Talking about that,
if it is another person. And so one of the points I brought up, in my review of Unbowed, Unbent, Unbroken, the episode actually happened. So this was reacting within 24 hours and within kind of the instant reaction to Game of Thrones is, and I don't think, I'm not going to accuse the user of doing this, but there is a protective sense to fandom where this is my character, I cherish this character, and anything that either goes wrong for that character or goes against how I characterize or think that this character is going to proceed in the books, perhaps, is kind of a betrayal of that character. And that's kind of what I'm wondering here is how much of the reaction to this is because it is Sansa Stark, who personally is my favorite female character in A Song of Ice and Fire. I think she's a very important viewpoint, and I know gladly Jeff's not on this podcast.
Well, always we're thankful for that.
I just wonder, and I'm not saying this to downplay the points, but how much of this is driven by this is Sansa Stark, and she does have this very specific storyline where Joffrey beats her but never gets to the point of raping her. Is it one of the kettle? I can't remember who saves her when she goes to the Vale the first time at the end of A Storm of Swords, and the drunk, maybe was it Marillion?
Marillion tries to
Lynn Corbray is the one. Not Lynn Corbray. Sorry.
Lothar Brune.
Lothar Brune.
Oh, it's Brune. That's right.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, no, Lynn Corbray likes the kiddos, right? He's that
supposedly.
No. I don't think he likes the. It's not actually that he likes. And I think that George tried to correct this as much as possible in the Elaine 1 chapter. They use the word boys because the thing is, as a language, we're conditioned to say girls sometimes instead of women, and people accept that. And they're using the term boys, but that's less commonly used when referring to how someone likes likes men, right, etc. And that has to do with anyway, usage of all that. But anyways, yeah.
I mean, go ahead, Matt. You hadn't talked yet. Yeah.
Okay. I think I understand the economy of getting the story right, and you want to get Sansa in the North because they're putting their foot down on the pedal. But out of all the plot lines they could have taken from George, they take the one that is literally in the books just to shock you. They didn't have to take that one. Why not take that plot line, throw it out, pick up something like Stoneheart, pick up something like Aegon. They didn't need to do this to Sansa. And if they wanted her to go to the North, okay, so you bring her there, she marries Ramsay. There's other people he could do horrible things to. He could just mentally torture her or something else that's less visceral happening to her. You don't have to give her Jane Poole's story. That's a really extraneous plot that you don't need. And I really don't know why they did it. And I think this user's kind of right. I think it's just shock value. They needed to give Sansa some sort of spice in her plotline because it was going to be really boring having her hang out in Winterfell doing nothing. So why don't we pick the most ridiculous thing we can think of from George?
And it doesn't help. It doesn't help that it's kind of compounded by a bunch of other questionable decisions, like Littlefinger just leaving her there and things like it's like they base, and a lot of the things we've said about this season is that, kind of the tail wagging the dog where they know where they want to go, but they don't know how to accommodate it. Yeah. So they're basically like, okay, we'll just have Littlefinger go to King's Landing and back real quick just so we can have this, it's just, there's no glue there. It's a bunch of pieces that might, technically fit together because of the economy and the characters you have, but there's no actual, and I think the user's also right that it just never paid off into anything significant, worthwhile in terms of a growth for Sansa. And I think that's probably the most important thing. It's always not a lot, like, whether do you depict this violence or do you not, but it's like, do you wrestle with that violence in a thoughtful way, in a way that informs the character, in a way that says something? And it really didn't. It was just like, this was Sansa's arc for the season. She got over it. She escaped. And then, she has a kind of scene to wrap it up at the end. But, I mean, all of the heat in season 6 was Jon versus Ramsay. It wasn't really Sansa versus Ramsay, or unless you guys interpret it differently. But, the Battle of the Bastards, it's literally named Jon versus Ramsay, And
it didn't even... So, I agree also with Matt that, like, one route that they could have taken was to just not include it. But the writers, as the Murphy Sue quotes, is like, you have this storyline with Ramsay, do you have one of your leading ladies who's an incredibly talented actor who followed for 5 do it. So, like, it seems like the thing that they were really invested in was, like, that thing, and then they said that the scene, the way it was portrayed, it wasn't about Sansa and it wasn't about Theon. Like, does that mean the scene was meant to be about Ramsay? Because that's a very strange choice to make the scene then about the antagonist. And rather than that, as now going off of what you were saying, it's that there was no follow-up, which is the ultimate question, or the first question that's presented in the post title of what did it bring? And the thing is, I have read stories, that depict sexual assault, and it's about the story of the person who experiences it and, like, what happens to them. Like, it's not in The Handmaid's Tale, Margaret Atwood's Mad Adam trilogy. There's a character who does experience sexual assault, and that has a profound effect on her, and that is a profound effect on, like, how she acts throughout the story and the choices that she'll make later on when she's able to make those choices. And it's not for her necessarily it's not her story about revenge, but, like, because not all sexual assault stories end like that, and even Sansa's, as it ends with Ramsay, would not have necessarily ended like that. Like, for example, when Joffrey died, Sansa was terrified and she ran away, but at the same time she was crying, and she didn't know why she was crying. Was she crying out of relief? Was she crying out of fear? And she was confused. She's like, was she crying for Joffrey? But these are all, like, complicated things that weren't addressed in the show. And then they wanted the payoff of character goes through very difficult thing and then experiences character growth because of that thing, but then they didn't actually have the character experience growth because of the difficult thing. So the challenge that was placed in front of the character did not actually directly correlate to that character arc.
I do think it is also, we're talking about the fallout of, Sansa's rape in this case. And, the thing that people were saying about season 6 was that it was all #feminism. In season 6, they seemed to really lift up the role of some of the female characters, including Sansa Stark. And, it got the #feminism, kind of joking tweet about season 6. And a lot of people kind of theorize that that is in reaction to, it's a building up, like we mentioned earlier. Ever since the pilot of the show with Drogo and Dany, this show has had rape controversies in how it's depicted George's story or told its own story. It's nothing new. But after season 5, after Sansa Stark, which compared to, and I'm not saying this is better, but, extras at Craster's Keep are kind of a up in direction in the Sept at Cersei. This is specifically, we're taking one of our major characters and we're going to have her be raped by another major character. So because of that created this huge backlash, and then kind of feels like they course corrected in terms of many people, maybe overcorrected by really playing up the roles of Sansa, going all Darth Cersei, turning Arya into a half Terminator kind of assassin, and they kind of really internalized that criticism.
Yeah. I think you're right.
I don't want to get too far off topic. I don't like to say bad things are the fault of David and Dan, but I think some of the things that have changed from the later seasons from the beginning are internalized criticisms of what people were saying in the first couple seasons, because I feel like they've simplified the names, like, who's who and who does what because, the show got the reputation of, oh, the character, the show has so many characters, you can't even remember people's names or whatever. So that's how you go from only Cat to your sister and stuff like that. And another complaint was that, a lot of the first 3 seasons are Jaime and Brienne are wandering in the Riverlands. Arya and Gendry are wandering in the river. Like, people are just wandering, and all of a sudden we have no travel now in the last 2 to 3 seasons. It kind of feels like a lot of the things that people would jokingly or in earnest describe the show's pitfalls as, or some of the things that were kind of wrong with it, they've kind of internalized that and kind of tried to address that in later seasons to, I would say, middling success. I mean, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I think we're going to talk about some of it when we get to the actual season 7 discussion, but that's kind of what I see here. And I think the reaction to the fallout from, the Sansa scene into season 6, especially with how they handled some of their characters, is like very evident to me, at least.
To add on to that, I mean, even the decision to take Jane Poole's plotline is, a lot of people were criticizing the show for removing extraneous plot lines. They're like, oh, well, we'll just take one that doesn't mean a lot, but it will make book fans happy. It's like, oh God, you picked the worst one. Why did you do this? But you can kind of see it in that way. I mean,
as opposed to like them writing their own original storyline, the fans getting upset about that, you mean? Like, yeah.
Sansa washes out her hair and reveals herself to be Aegon VI.
Yeah, exactly.
We could have, we could have had Arianne. We could have had Aegon. And I still think that Arianne was made for HBO. And now I'm also still curious as to what Michael was going to say earlier.
And then I was going to also mention that it's something we talked about in Aquil and Tankard, I think. In one of the Inside the Episodes, there was that council scene of Dany's War Council where it's basically all women at the table, right? And in the after the episode, inside the episode segment, David and Dan are like clapping themselves on the back for it. They're like, "Yeah, we did it! Look at this table full of women. That's great."
Oh, really?
They say that, and so yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Manu. Like, they've been hearing people. I know they say they don't read the blogs or whatever, but they've been hearing what people say, and by season 7, you have a table full of hashtag strong women who are fighting wars and all that kind of stuff, and they must be looking at it and going, "All right, yeah, we did it."
They do. So while they might not have written all of it, it is, I do say, some of their choice and direction. They can make the choice to bring more women into the writer's room. And it's a choice. I was bringing this up earlier in a chat that there is a show that has made that conscious choice to bring more women into the writer's room. Dan Harmon and his team on Rick and Morty have made the conscious, they were like, yeah, we have more women in the writers, like, women writers for the latest season. I guess that's season 4 of Rick and Morty. Is it season 3? Hold on. No, sorry.
Season 3 is airing now.
Yeah, sorry. They said we brought more women into the room for season 3, and I think that a lot of people would agree that this season has blown it out of the park. It's just taken the show to another level in terms of the way that it addresses things. And
if they had more women in the writing room, even if they made this horrible decision to impose Jane Poole on Sansa, they would have handled the consequences better, because they would have more understood what it was like from Sansa's perspective instead of focusing on Ramsay so much.
Or even Theon, right?
Yes.
I mean, part of it's that they love the actors too, and that it's one of those factors that's really kind of unfortunate, because they loved Ewan Rian, right? I mean,
for good reason.
And Ian Michael McElhead, whatever his name is, the guy who played Roose. They love both of them. So they're like, yeah, let's throw tons of material at these guys. They didn't want to have them disappear for a season. The same thing they did it in season 2 with Jaime when he's taken prisoner. He kills his cousin in the cell, which is people back then even were like, oh, that seems a little out of character for Jaime. But it's because they didn't want to have Nikolai sitting around doing nothing for a season. We should have known. Back in season 2.
And they did it in Dorne.
This was coming.
They did it in Dorne.
Because they loved Indira Varma.
Yeah, that's right. They changed everything for her.
Well, it's also talking about what they did with the North, much larger than just that marriage, is that instead of having it be a showdown between Stannis and Roose, they went for sexy Song of Ice and Fire, which is Ramsay versus Jon. And if you do downplay Ramsay a little bit, you make Roose the big bad, and you do something better with Stannis, you can get away with Sansa and Winterfell and not necessarily having to do a marital rape scene, or like, or you can find a way to, kill Ramsay off earlier or something. You could maybe do, but the fact is they wanted to build that heat for Ramsay. They wanted to make him the next Joffrey, and, they've shown at times that if they want to make someone seem like a bad guy, they just put that person opposite a woman and make them, like, it's very cheap. They don't earn some of their villainization. And that's sadly, I think, some of what's at play here too.
What you're saying about how they wanted to make Ramsay a star, they wanted to make him a big part of the show. Well, if you do it the other way and you sort of go towards the book plot, you have to include houses like the Manderleys. You have to go after and get all these small houses like Barbary Dustin, and you're introducing all these new characters that nobody knows. And like you were saying about how they're internalizing criticism, they're like, well, we could do the Great Northern Conspiracy, or we could just make Ramsay a big bad and use Sansa for that. That's less locations, that's less actors they have to hype up and hire. It makes sense from a economical viewpoint. And I completely understand how they get there, but it's just such a bad decision.
I mean, oh man, could you imagine though, like a season with Stannis coming to attack Winterfell, and like it's in the middle of Sansa's wedding or something, like he besieges the castle and like they never get to the wedding, so it's like built up to but never.
Or you don't
have to go through the same plot.
You could do
the lighthouse.
What's it called?
Yeah.
Reek and Jane's flight, to escape Winterfell. You could have that be the wedding night, Theon, take my bride to my room. Yeah. And then, you could have them escape at that point. I mean, there's no, spear. You can do something there where you avoid the bad stuff, still kind of have your economics of getting everywhere where they need to be. I mean, I've thought about it a lot because at the time I didn't necessarily disagree with sending Sansa to Winterfell. It's just what happened there. And I mean, again, I think we talked about it a little bit. It's just like that whole northern storyline with Stannis being easily defeated and Brienne having to stare at a candle all season. Like, I mean, it was just rough, Winterfell and surrounding Winterfell in season 5.
Yeah, it was rough. I think that's the TLDR of this whole discussion is Winterfell was rough in season 5. And
7.
Oh, spoilers for
later.
Well,
that's later. We're going to talk about that later. I believe there's one more post on the table, and I believe it belongs to JoeMagician. So, what did you bring us?
I have here a fantastic post titled, "Did Grand Maester Pycelle have another secret motive to support the Lannisters? Gurm says he did," by user Max Garnot.
No,
Max Garnot?
Is that an M or an R?
I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Garnot.
Hold on, I'm gonna highlight it.
It's an R.
It looks like an RN.
Garnot.
It's
Garnot.
Garnot. Garnot. It's not a goat. Unbelievable, this guy. So what this post goes on to talk about is that in an interview or an answer given by George, he's asked about Pycelle's motives, and he says, the question is, why is Pycelle so loyal to the Lannisters? And he says, there's backstory yet to be revealed, certainly, but if you ask Pycelle, he would insist that he was acting in the best interest of the realm. Now, that's an answer that implies that if he's insisting something, it's probably not true. And user Max Ganat goes into different reasons about what could Pycelle's motivations could be. Now, we at Maester Monthly have an excellent explanation that it is Tywin. Yes. That Pycelle was in love with Tywin. It was a secret romance blooming through King's Landing across the decades, and he's loyal to Tywin, not to the Lannisters. But the user makes another good argument that it could be a sort of corruption sort of thing between Old Town and the Lannisters, because Aerys was the only person who can control Aerys throughout his life was Tywin. So if you wanted to control the throne, then you make deals with Tywin. And Pycelle and Tywin is sort of the link between the two. And that's how you keep most of the realm more or less stable through this time, by using those two great powers, with the Westerlands and the Reach. It's sort of tinfoily. It's kind of like it's kind of like Grand Maester conspiracy territory, but I think it's not a terrible explanation that there may be something other than true love binding Pycelle and the Lannisters together. What do you guys think?
I like it just because, I will take all of that and all the, if you really want to, put some pictures in your mind, please Google young Charles Dance and young Julian Glover. Those guys
I didn't know that's where we were going. I was ready for the Rule 34.
Those guys could get it. But, I mean, I know this has nothing to do with the text, but I mean, I think there's stuff in the show that kind of hints at it. So there's the Olenna and Tywin scene where they kind of hint, when you, Tywin, when you were a young man, you never, did this and this and this. And then there's actually a deleted scene on the season 3 DVD where Tywin is fishing and, Grand Maester kind of saunters up to him in his old, crippled way or whatever. And then he's like, I know this is an act. You can just talk to... And then, they have a normal conversation. And we also know that Pycelle is very horny. Because there are multiple Pycelle with lady scenes. So that actually... Pycelle might be like, bi.
Bi-cell?
Bi-cell, yeah.
Bi-cell Pywin.
Wow.
Wow.
I'm
so
into
woke.
it.
Yeah.
I think it's beautiful.
Oh my god. That's amazing. I mean, I was going to say always, ever since it was first suggested, or since I first saw it suggested, I've liked the idea of Pywin. I don't know, there's this whole thing with all these people who meet through the War of the Nine Penny Kings and all that, and, it's not gay when you're at war, and so Pycelle and Tywin just... Jeff taught me that. Jeff told me that.
Accurate.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
No, but, I don't know, you could see some sort of weird romance, and maybe then an unrequited romance once they're back in court, with Pycelle and... just doing things to win Tywin's favor. And really, when you think about it, Jaime introduces it in the first book, The Things I Do for Love, right? It's this, Pycelle has done all sorts of things out of love for the Lannisters, and maybe love for one Lannister in particular.
Who, it might have been like when they met during the War of the Nine Penny Kings. Or I guess everyone else here has some like very obvious answers that maybe we should consider of how maybe it's that Pycelle was a Lannister or something at some point in time, but
that too.
That doesn't completely rule out the ship, considering Jaime and Cersei.
Very true.
That would be interesting.
Ooh.
All right.
Oh, wow.
Oh, so they really do take after Tywin then.
Man.
I mean, Tywin did marry his cousin, so
snap.
He
So
did.
What about the Old Town Pycelle Maester thing? Or are we just going to talk about how much they're in love? The actual post, not the thing we made up.
How much did the Maesters tie the Targaryens to magic even after losing the dragons? That they would still be gunning for their extermination, which I do believe, based on other things that we've been presented, showing the potential of the Grand Maester conspiracy. Maybe they still saw the Targaryens as a harmful force, or they still had this fascination with fire and magic, especially seeing how crazy Aerys was, and then egg kind of almost killed his entire house.
It's that fascination with wildfire that was getting people into trouble, and Aerys was definitely showing signs of it, right? He thought he was going to drink wildfire at some point, right? Return to a dragon.
True. And then, I guess Aryan Brightflame decided that was a good idea. And I'm sure the Maesters heard about that, and they're like, there's just something up.
Yeah.
And then you have a blossoming relationship between Pycelle and Tywin. The Maesters take advantage. Both of them benefit from it. Oh, you're tight with Tywin, right? Let's see what we can do about that.
All right, so our big topic for this episode, and the whole reason that we even invited Manu here not the whole reason.
It's half.
Well, we invited Manu because he's like, let's do this together, and I was like, yeah, let's do it.
Let's figure out a topic.
That's right. That's
good story. Yeah,
that's a little bit of meta backstory. But our whole
it's kind of
the
like
whole reason
season
for this
7.
cast.
You wanted me, so you wrote the story to get me where you needed to be at the end.
Exactly.
This is true.
We knew the end of this story was doing a podcast with Manu. We just had to come up with the reason. And that reason is we're going to do a big Season 7 wrap-up. Now that it's been well over, we thought it would be nice to take a look back. Yeah, so our big topic for the day is going to be what's new in Season 7. We're going to talk about the production a little bit. We're going to talk about the season as a whole, since we didn't really do that in our individual wrap-ups. And I'm going to go ahead and turn the metaphorical mic, over to Manu, who I think has some great discussion questions for us about Season 7.
Yes, I do. So, you may know that I also do recap episodes of Game of Thrones, so I do kind of episode by episode break it down, but I did want to talk about kind of in summary, and especially since you guys do a great job on Quill and Tankard, really breaking it down, especially plot by plot and how it compares to the books. Maybe talk about some of the visual and audio storytelling aspects that we kind of don't talk about as much when you're knee deep into the fandom. And I think we'll just start with the basic, production aspects, and we'll just start with cinematography and kind of the visual storytelling of Game of Thrones, because, we've kind of talked about how David and Dan have run out of actual source material and plot to run on. So they kind of need to diversify the ways that they, help make Game of Thrones a great television show, if you consider it a great television show. And part of that they've done this season is they've worked in a lot of new techniques, and or they've used techniques a little more frequently or more prominently than they have in the past. I think the first one that kind of stands out is they did a montage this season, a literal montage. Something almost to the cadence of something you'd see in a Breaking Bad cold open, which is, just a very rhythmic cuts between things that is both, it's visually coherent, but it also kind of says something, and it really spoke to what Sam, this was in the premiere of the season, and in this short montage, they really established what has Sam been doing since we last saw him, ride up to Old Town at the end of season 6. So I thought that was an effective use of a new technique. And as far as I know, they haven't really used a montage in that fashion before.
I don't think so. The only other thing the only other thing close to a montage is Littlefinger's speech back in season 3, I guess. The Chaos is a Ladder one, or maybe that was season 4. Where during that montage, we get the shot of Roz crossbowed to the bed and Sansa weeping as the ship sails away. Like these. But that was very different, because it was, it came at the end of the episode as the big art moment at the end of the episode when Littlefinger's speech was going on, as opposed to this, which, like you said, it tells a story. It tells us. Yeah. It uses that montage to tell us the narrative of what's been happening.
But I think, speaking to you, because what I think about that Littlefinger montage specifically is that it specifically has voiceover narration over other events happening, which you almost never see. Yeah. And that dovetails nicely into something that, not that they've never used, but that they used in that Littlefinger scene, is the siege of Casterly Rock. They basically had Tyrion in the same role as Littlefinger was there, where he's not on the set of the actual events they're depicting, but he's telling you, but I built a hole into the basement that, I used to bring women into. And through that, it was kind of this, and almost because they had that season 3 where that kind of led into the finale of the episode, it kind of gives you the hint. It's like, okay, this season's going to end, or this episode's going to end with a set piece of the siege of Casterly Rock. So by having used it once, it almost kind of has expectations like, okay, this is putting a wrapper on the episode, where really that was kind of a zigzag where they were kind of setting you up for the fall of Highgarden, and really Casterly Rock was not a part of that. So that was something that's necessarily new, but something that they haven't gone to a lot of, which, sometimes they do tend to harp on the same beats, like reciting season 1 lines that don't have any narrative significance, like, "That's not you," or whatever the hell that whole scene was. Another thing,
loved that one.
Another one I want to talk about is, besides the montage, they really utilize transitions well this season, cutting from place to place coherently. And I think the one that jumps to mind is, I think, Sam. I can't remember if he was cutting the pus off of Jorah. Yeah, no, he was cutting off the pus off of Jorah, and that goes directly into Arya's bleeding pie, essentially, or whatever.
And there was the scene, the sex scene that went right into the hand in the book.
Right, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. That's, really,
Were those the same episode?
The pie one.
Yeah,
Were those both episode 2? No. The drawer one would be 3, I guess.
That would have come after, because the book scene is where he's talking to him about if he wants to actually try it.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
But I think that one is less of they're really telling us something or informing the characters or themes here. That's more just visual coherence. And it's also just, it kind of makes the audience take a step back in a good way, not one of those things that takes you out of it, but it is like kind of a shocking thing in an almost nothing of significance moment or whatever.
Right. I know that in past seasons they've had to do a lot of mix and matching with scenes. Like, they'll write it one way and then scenes from one episode will end up edited to a different episode. So the fact that they're able to do those transitions, you got to wonder if, as the show is kind of shrinking a little bit, if they're able to plan for those things a little better and to say, hey, wouldn't it be funny to do this in advance, as opposed to just letting the editors figure it out for themselves, sort of.
Yeah.
Little do you know, you have maybe or I hinted at something I will bring up when we get to our wrap up in the end of this discussion.
Right.
So nice job.
Hell yeah.
Just a couple other ones I'll burn off, just in terms of some things they did with the visuals this season. The scene where Bran and Littlefinger talk about the dagger. They had, I couldn't find the best term for this. It's called spiking the camera. It's where the actor looks directly into the camera. And when I look it up online, you usually hear it's usually bad actors and bad TV shows, or perhaps adult entertainment looking at the camera when they shouldn't be, because, it takes you out of the suspension of disbelief.
Right.
But we've also, you can use it effectively in a narrative. I think Lord of the Rings has so many actors staring right into the camera scenes. And I think Game of Thrones has never had anywhere where the actors are speaking really directly into the camera. And to have that scene be it, especially because they weren't really using that until Bran does the whole chaos is a ladder thing. And then they only use it for that exchange, not for the whole dialogue or whatever. But just using that technique of, it's already an unsettling scene with the way Bran is, the way Littlefinger is with everyone. It just adds that little extra thing that it really makes what Bran says unnerving. And I think this one actually does, I don't want to say it has a lot of narrative weight, but it does add some of that eeriness to Bran. Because at this point, and even now, I don't really know exactly what they're doing with Bran. He just seems kind of an exposition vehicle for the most part. But, maybe we've kind of
called him Dr. Branhattan.
Oh, yeah, I like that. That, at the time, was like a perfect way to kind of sell, this is kind of Bran's out there-ness, and they really accentuated that with the looking into the...
That's a really good one. And in an earlier Maester Monthly, we talked about with Sam about the music and how music is often used in that way. Like, they'll use instruments they haven't ever gone to before to throw you off.
And by this we mean the user Sam R. We weren't
Sam
talking
R.
about the Samwell Tarly scene.
Not Samwell Tarly, Sam R. fellow mod.
Right, yeah.
And just how random bits of something being off kilter, like even what do they call when the shot is kind of tilted? Like that's a bad.
It's called tilted, right?
I don't know. No, I think there's a certain term for it, like a Dutch angle or something.
R.I.P. Aaron.
Clearly, me, the TV expert, has no idea what you're...
Yeah, anyways.
No, you're I 100% agree there is a word for it.
But I just mean they're using...
That's our official stance, and they're using
something new and unusual, and something that's usually reserved for bad TV to be like, wow, this is really strange.
Right.
Kind of the last ones before I throw something at you is... I also feel like Game of Thrones expanded its color palette this season, and I'm specifically thinking about the loot train battle, because as we've seen, and it might have been discussed on this Quill and Takerd, but a lot of the battles have either been at night or have been up north against icy, cold, snowfall settings. Even like battles we haven't gotten, like Stannis versus Ramsay and stuff. It's been a very specific kind of color palette for those. And what the loot train battle did was brought oranges and reds and browns into play, which is just something that's visually refreshing, Game of Thrones has a reputation of being dark and dreary, and that's not just the plot threads and the arcs, it's also just, it's the world they live in, the way it's intentionally shot. I think that's not, unintentional by any means. And I think that was something that really helped that battle specifically pop. And I wasn't as big a fan of Beyond the Wall, and I think that's, not an unpopular opinion really, but it was pretty magnificent when you have the cold scene that we're used to with Jon and all them surrounded, and all of a sudden you have this, it's an upshot where the camera's on the ground, you see Jon, you see the gray sky behind him, and then all of a sudden it explodes into oranges and reds, and Daenerys swoops in and Drogon, and kind of seeding that color palette earlier in the Spoils of War really helped, at least visually, that part of the Beyond. Like, I have lots of issues with the actual, ins and outs of the mechanics of that scene, but visually the way that, because that entire episode is almost completely up north. It's very cold. It's very specifically blues, whites, grays, and then to all of a sudden have this explosion of, whatever, Song of Ice and Fire. You can, make it very poetic if you want, but essentially it's just, it's something new in a way that, at this point, we've seen Drogon a bunch of times, we've seen zombies a bunch of times, but to kind of herald, hey, we're actually kind of getting this end game, high fantasy kind of battle stuff, we're also going to mix these kind of color palettes. And for that to have worked, they kind of had to establish the, earlier stuff in the Spoils of War with the loot train battle, with Field of Fire, with, showing us some of those reds. And I know, Jeff has mentioned he wished we had seen, snow earlier in the South in Game of Thrones. And in general, I agree with that assessment. But I do like that they did introduce the, more rustic colors of the South earlier in the season to really help that play up the battle at the end. So I'm going to use that.
Totally, yeah.
To kind of pivot into asking you guys a couple questions because, I think one of the MVPs of the season, talking about the visual storytelling, is like the directors of photography. And I love them so much that I didn't even look up a single one's name. But I wanted to ask you if there are any specific shots or moments, visually speaking, that really stuck out to you. And the two I'm going to lead with is, the first one is from Beyond the Wall. It's right the aftermath of the loot train battle, and Tyrion walking through the ashy field. I remember there's this really nice down long shot of him just surrounded by ash and corpses, and I don't want to call that beautiful, but it was just, what was on the scene was really just incredible to look at. And then similarly, I really liked the shot of the whites watching Viserion burn down the wall. Just like the shot of them all looking up, blue-eyed. You see flashes of blue in the sky, but it's all happening behind the audience, essentially. And I thought that specifically was a really great shot. So I'm sorry to take two of the obvious ones off the table for you, but...
Technically, it isn't a new shot. Season 7 was full of callbacks, and this shot was also a callback towards the end of the Winterfell arc of Season 7. We have both Sansa and Arya atop the walls of Winterfell, and it ends the season very similarly to the way that Sansa and Jon ended Season 6 atop the walls of Winterfell, where they're both framed. And it's just a nice, it just seems like that's the spot, and that's how they show the Starks coming back together, I guess, and figuring things out, once they've come together by, like, presenting them framed behind and safe behind the walls of Winterfell. And because the shot is a little balanced, while they might not be of similar heights, it's balanced in that it shows them together, and creates that symmetry.
Right, it's not about Sansa with Arya in the background or vice versa. It's about, it's a shot putting the two of them on the same footing in the same place.
Yeah.
That's a good one. I like that one. I am gonna have to pick some of the, like, I don't know, the bigger ones, I guess. The shot of Drogon strafing the wagons the field, the loot train battle, Field of Fire, or whatever. I stood up from the couch. Like, that and I never stand up from the couch for anything.
Really?
For food, to use the I like it. Yeah, it got me on my feet because it was so impressive, and I don't think I've ever seen a TV show do something like that, or at least a fantasy TV show. That was something out of like Lord of the Rings, and I mean that in a good way, like just spectacular. And I wasn't going, oh, that looks so fake, that looks so crappy. It blew my mind to see that happening on a TV show for me. It was that, and maybe the scene at the start of the next episode, right after the Ashfield one, Manu, where Drogon's on that hill, you know?
That was incredible,
but
that scene.
That was another one where I gasped, the reveal of Drogon on the hill overlooking the soldiers. It was just really impressive looking, and a testament to how, I mean, it would be really easy for the CGI to be crappy in Game of Thrones and for the visual effects to be kind of lackluster. But they really hit him on the head, especially with the dragons. So those are my two picks, I think. Drogon. I just love Drogon.
Let's see here, my two picks. My first one is, we mentioned this during the Cool and Tankard, and I actually agreed with Aaron, thought how it could be improved a little bit, but it was when they were on the island beyond the wall, and they're looking around, and you just see the blue eyes watching them everywhere. And that just sort of the visual impact of how, you know, how the cold is patient and how it's just kind of waiting to kill them. I thought that was a really powerful way of showing just how truly screwed they were, but we knew they wouldn't because it was Game of Thrones, so they were going to get out of it. But if they had killed more characters, that would have been a very elegant way to start it off, to pay off what they were setting up with those guys. And I think my second favorite one, I don't think this is new though, it was Bronn running through the battle, and how they were doing the tracking shot of him running from the Dothraki, and there's a chase scene in it, and there's all the fire, and the people are just falling over all around him. They did that for Jon in the Battle of the Bastards, but I think this was a better version of it. Just the way, and how he ran up on the scorpion, and I don't know. It
was very dynamic. Yeah.
I was on the edge of my seat while that was happening. I was convinced Bronn was about to bite it, where in a way that I never thought Jon would bite it in the Battle of the Bastards.
And he should have bit it, but
yeah.
Yeah. I didn't know we were doing favorites. I guess my favorite would actually be, speaking of transitions, because we had never quite had a scene like this before, because we had never had a moment as important as this before, where we see Jaime leaving King's Landing, and then it signals the turn from autumn into winter, and then we have this slow scene where everything slows down. There's no people, and it's no longer about the characters of Game of Thrones or of A Song of Ice and Fire. It's about Westeros. It's about King's Landing and the fate of like the entire land, and we see the snows begin to sweep over it and the darkness come, and then we know that things have changed in the story because of that. Not because anyone says it, but because of the way that it's conveyed through that cinematography and that shot.
Yeah.
And before we move off cinematography, there is one thing I wanted to say in terms of areas they could improve, and this is not my idea, so I don't want to be this genius, but some of the issues that people had with, say, the timing of Daenerys arriving, to save Jon and the band, north of the wall. How long did that take? How fast did she get there? If they had used, some more fades between shots, like showing, the band going to sleep and then having that fade out into whatever they did next, that's a way to show passage of time. And that way it allows the mind to just more naturally say, oh, maybe a day passed, I don't even know what they said. But, I mean, those are just little things, because there was a lot of discussion about the logical, pitfalls of this season of Game of Thrones. I mean, it's a discussion worth having, but some of those things are more easily fixable and these are things that, just a little more elegance with some of the, transitions might actually alleviate some of the bigger concerns that people have of some of the mechanics. So, that's just one thing I wanted to touch on before we jump to the next one. And I'm actually going to bump one up since you mentioned the dragon strafing shot. let's talk about the let's talk about the CGI next. And basically, Game of Thrones has been very upfront that it's going towards a cinematic style finish. Mm-hmm. And, you know, stuff we saw in the first couple of seasons, special effects was not really, it's what you'd expect of a high budget television show. It was nothing, you know, maybe until like the sack of Astapor, where it's just like, I didn't really lose myself telling it was fake, because even some of the stuff with like the Fist of the First Men, like those, you know, kind of, I think these were all CGI White Walkers, didn't work as well as when they combined it with the prosthetic and the makeups that they would when they had to actually have them on set with more human actors. But I'm digressing a bit here. Basically, Game of Thrones has, you know, upped its game, you know, every season to a point where now people consider it cinematic. Game of Thrones goes for a more cinematic experience, do you think the special effects it's showing you are of that caliber? Could you put it up against Lord of the Rings or and I know that we're comparing things from, you know, somewhat different eras, even if they're not 20 years old. But can you, you know, Beyond the Wall was at your IMAX, or if The Spoils of War was on your IMAX, does that feel like that was cinematic quality to you? And, you know, speaking of that, are there stuff that really worked for you visually? Are there special effects shots that didn't work for you? Because I have 3 off the top of my head that, you know, kind of didn't work for us. And Highgarden, Casterly Rock are 2 that come to mind, because I think, especially for us book readers who have been, we're finally going to see those 2 castles in Winds or whatever. And then you hear the show's going to go there. And then you kind of just get these long CGI generic castle shots. Those were underwhelming. I don't think Nymeria particularly looked great. And I think that's one of the things where they kind of know that, and that's partially why Ghost was cut from the season, is they don't love their direwolf mechanics. I think the official explanation is it's very easy to do whatever they want with the dragons. There's no defining rules of motion or physics that define how a dragon moves, because dragons went extinct many years ago. Humans haven't seen them since. But, you know, we know what wolves look like. We know how they behave. We know what dogs behave like. And it's a lot harder, they say, to really recreate that to the scale that they need to for direwolves. Whether you buy that or, for the money that they're shelling out to do Beyond the Wall and Spoils of War, they're just choosing not to do it on that kind of stuff. So, so do you guys mostly think that the special effects are of the quality that they believe it is or should be for what they're going for? And is there stuff that did and that you loved or really didn't like in this past season?
I can't think of any special effects that I didn't like.
You mentioned Nymeria, and that's probably my biggest one, is like the direwolves have always been awkward because they have to Photoshop these real wolves into, so
and then make
because
them
you can't have the humans interact with the wolves. It means you get this awkward, over the shoulder shots of a wolf and a human looking at each other, but you don't really get the two of them together very much, and so it just makes scenes look awkward when you have that. I think that's honestly, the wolves are probably the worst thing about the show, which is really too bad because you think I don't know. I think they could do that.
Are we counting special effects as costuming and things like that? Because I'm thinking about
prosthetics.
I really don't like what they've done with the White Walkers and some of the whites.
In the costuming?
Yeah, the costuming and the special effects around them, especially the Night King on Viserion. I thought that looked clownish. I thought it looked like something out of World of Warcraft, like a character on the dragon just sort of floating in front of the wall.
Like with his empty
face. Like he was in the Frozen Throne expansion. Yeah, he's just kind of sitting there just going up and down. I thought a lot of the White Walker stuff and some of the whites took me out of it in a way the other ones didn't.
I wonder if that's not...
the other ones.
No.
I wonder if the Night King stuff isn't... they're clearly going for that, hitting the uncanny valley in the sweet spot, right? Making him look weird and creepy. But maybe they're also hitting it in the awkward spot in the sense that he looks like a mannequin sometimes because his face never changes and he never smiles or whatever. So I wonder if that's...
But it's just frozen Sif. That's just his personality.
But they can talk. There's no...
Have we seen them talk in the show?
I think in the opening thing they did move
in
their
the finale
mouths.
for season 2, when Sam sees the army of the dead, the one White Walker raises his spear and goes.
The Nazgul
like
scream.
that.
Yeah.
But that's not talking.
Yeah,
The
But
Nazgul
like,
scream.
we know they can talk in the books, but we haven't.
But that was in the show.
seen-
That was in.
Yeah,
he
I'm
just
saying,
said.
have we had any
So
indication
one-
in the show?
right.
We
Yeah,
can actually
One
what he
thing
just said.
I kind of am not upset, but sad the show went away from is in that cold open for season 1, and even in season 2 where John finds Craster's baby, there's all this weird ice crackling sound in the Foley work, and I always interpreted that as ice cracking as how the White Walkers communicated, and that's kind of,
Exactly.
I did not dislike the Nazgul scream because it was the Nazgul scream. I disliked it because it kind of broke the ice-breaking canon I had in my head, because that would have been really cool if they did have language, but it just sounded like ice breaking or whatever, sounds of winter, so to speak.
For what it's worth, the show
Which is-
did invent the name of the other's language, of the White Walker's language, Scroth, which didn't exist as a...
Scroth.
Yeah, Scroth, which that was not something George came up with. That was something, I can't remember if it was David Peterson, whoever came up with
That's
it.
actually
they haven't used
not
it.
bad,
They haven't touched
all
it,
things
but it's
considered.
Scroth.
And Scroll. The prologue of A Game of Thrones, in fact, describes the way that the White Walkers talk as sounding like ice cracking. So that would have made sense.
We're kind of getting off the special effects part, and this is my fault. But I think compared to how well they've done with the dragons and some of the battles, I don't think that part of the show, the fantasy part of it, is holding up with the rest of it. But that's just my personal opinion.
I do like, so if we're talking about the costuming of the others in the White Walkers, now that I know about how Michelle Clapton pulls inspiration for the costumes after we did the Maester Monthly prior to this one, before season 7 started, you can really see so she took a lot of inspiration from also Japan and samurai armor when she was putting together the costumes for the North. You can also see a lot of that, and the armor for the various areas of the Seven Kingdoms, and you can see a lot of that influence in the costuming of the White Walkers.
Yeah.
I also think that they just figured out the CGI and prosthetics and makeup. It's just easier if they have the White Walkers in clothes. So then they really only have to worry about a couple exposed parts, and but I think you're absolutely right. That there's a lot of thought that goes into that. And hey, that actually transitions into a question on costuming. Something I'm completely unqualified to talk about, but I do think it is worth talking about, especially with the return of Michelle Clapton. One of my favorite personal readings is, and it's kind of been, talked about a lot, about how everyone's, going into their black outfits, from Darth Sansa in season 4, just everyone's trying to dress all black, even to the last shots of the season with Jaime donning a black cape and even a black horse to ride north. Some of it, is just, whatever, black's the opposite color for some of these people, especially when you think of Sansa as being kind of this pure girl, and her heel turn. Talked a lot about Sansa this episode, and Jaime being a white knight, a white cloak, and then him. But I actually just like the simple reading that those Seven Kingdoms are slowly taking the black as we're all going to go fight the White Walker. It just kind of, as they all fold into what, they all have to be the Night's Watch, essentially. So I don't think that's necessarily what, the showrunners are going for, but I think that's a reading that I like and generally holds up for me. I mean, there's no reason Cersei should be in black under that theory because she's not fighting. But I mean, if she's yours, symbolically, she's the head of the Seven Kingdoms of Westeros. She's kind of reflecting what's happening, in her country, more broadly speaking. And speaking of Cersei and costuming, I did enjoy that they had her one handmaiden that she still has, dressed completely like her. Bernadette.
Yep.
So
same haircut, same dress. Yeah.
I get what they're going with the costuming, and they're trying to make you like, oh, this is getting more serious and more dire. But I always liked how George chose to inject color into random characters. Like Mance famously had his red striped cloak. Tormund wore a lot of like gold armbands, and these are people who had like the hardest lives in Westeros. I don't think I think it works for how they're trying to make it more serious over time. I don't know. I just miss how the characters were dressed in their house colors and how there was just more on the screen. I don't know why it would be like, oh, well, everything's getting a little dire. Time to dress all in black. I mean, that's like something you do for TV if you're a president, not like regular people.
Everyone's going through their angsty teenage phase as they go through their character arcs.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that, so the point you made about Jaime donning black clothing, granted we've seen him mostly dressed in his house colors as opposed to in his Kingsguard armor, but George has made a lot of effort of playing with the portrayal of light and dark in characters in A Song of Ice and Fire. So that's why, like, you have the Kingsguard, a lot of them, as we see in the Game of Thrones, and especially in A Clash of Kings, with Sansa's storyline, a lot of them are, like, terrible. They're, like, really bad at being knights. And then you have the Night's Watch, and they're wearing black. They're not the White Knights, but they're the ones who are trying to defend the realm, and so forth. And so now you have Jaime shedding being the Kingsguard and taking on black, which could which could also be part of, like, that turn in his character, that he's shed that identity. Regarding everyone else being darker, I don't know. I wonder if... So, one character has actually taken a different turn, and the last time we saw her wearing white was during... Or pure white like that was during one of her wedding days. If I'm not mistaken, that would be Daenerys. While everyone else is out here wearing black, she's donning more white clothing, so...
Yeah, she put on that awesome flight suit, the white snow flight suit. That was one of the best costumes this season, I think. If not, like, my favorite one.
Very detailed.
But she was wearing the Targaryen black with the red sash, which, you know, actually made that white outfit pop even more when they did reveal it, so...
Exactly.
It's not something I'm saying, this is what David and Dan were going for, but it's just, something that I thought was nice and kind of ties what they're doing costuming, because whether that's true or not, they do put a lot of thought into the costuming that goes into the show. And,
especially now that Michelle Clapton is back in the pilot's chair or whatever. There was also the scene where Arya walks up to fight Brienne, to spar with Brienne. She's dressed exactly like Ned was dressed the last time she saw him alive. Or I guess second to last, because she saw him at Baelor's. But she's got the sort of shoulder pads. She's even wearing her hair the same way. It's all the very, very Ned look. But I think the other Stark kids are kind of doing it too. I mean, Jon's got his furs on, and
I think Bran has it as well. Just, he's always in the furs and in the wheelchair, so you don't get the shot. But I think there were those Entertainment Weekly shots going into the season where they had all four of the actors, side by side, and they all were, little Ned Starks essentially.
Except Sansa, who was being a little Catelyn.
Yes. But and I think especially at what was the name of the last episode? Oh, The Dragon and the Wolf. Like, I feel like that episode specifically just brought out all the Ned Stark, imagery and references between Sansa and Arya's talk and Littlefinger's trial. So, I think it was just, I think it's meant to make us remember Ned Stark, and I think it did effectively. So, and again, it's also just, a lot of Game of Thrones is the Starks are thrown to the wind and scattered to opposite ends of the continent, and even the world either, because Arya crosses the sea. And now that they're all back, it's kind of like how you were talking about the shot of them within the parapets of Winterfell, and, the wolves are back home. The outfit is another way to also hammer home that theme as well. I do want to touch on one more thing before we move into just our kind of final discussion, which is set design. There were kind of a couple prominent new sets this season. First is they kind of really redid Dragonstone. They kept the map room, which I think was a no-brainer, but then they added a throne room. They gave more their beaches. There's this obsidian cave. There's that long causeway they give real geography to Dragonstone in a way where it was clearly just a set and a beach whenever they needed it for Stannis. There's Cersei's map room, which might have just been more for just, hey, we're going to set up what's going on this season, so let's do this on the map room, because that's really the only episode where it's set up, but it is a beautiful map. And I really love Jaime's reactions to walking in and discovering an entire map painted on the floor. And then I think the other big set that showed up this season was the Dragon Pit, which, probably has a little more weight for us because, the Dragon Pit has a lot of significance to the history of Westeros. Have we even been inside the Dragon Pit in A Song of Ice and Fire proper? There probably would be no reason to be at this point.
Not that I know of.
Not in the 5 books.
Right.
Yeah. In histories,
And it's just one of those sets that even if they didn't do much, I mean, they clearly took like a ruined Colosseum, but it allows the story to tell a lot of history about dragons and and the show didn't really do it that much. They just mentioned how the dragons grew smaller. I don't think they even mentioned the fact that having a roof over a dragon's head is what, kind of restricts its size or locking it up kind of. But those were, some new sets that I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on those sets.
I mean, Dragonstone was just so eye popping. They devoted that whole last 5 minutes of the first episode just to Dany silently walking through Dragonstone.
Mm-hmm.
That was so good.
That was fantastic. That was a combination both of good scouting, good location scouting, because that beach and all that, I mean, that's just a beach in Spain. And they found that and they were like, great, let's use it. And then also the throne room itself, which is designed to echo the beach with that big slanting throne and all that. And it feels very like Dragon Queen-ish and, it carries a lot of that weight for Dany. So yeah, Dragonstone, far and away, was my favorite new sort of place to visit this season.
It was also good scouting insofar as they found an island with no remaining guards or soldiers, so they could just walk up there and take it. So it was well strategically scouted and well, cinematically scouted.
That's right.
I mean, I guess I talked about it earlier in one of the Quillen Tankards, but I'll reiterate that one of the things that I loved because they just did such good scouting was the sort of rocks that you see in the background when Dany is walking on the island. Those are clearly, they look volcanic, and then that's about it. That's my point one. It just looked great, and I don't know, the way that they portrayed Dragonstone, it was in the light as opposed to when it was with Stannis, it was always very dark. And it felt in that moment, it actually felt majestic, the kind of place where, it would kind of be chill living here and placing the heir to the Iron Throne there.
Yeah, right.
But it's also an interesting contrast because even outside of the show, a lot of the depictions of Dragonstone, for example, in the World of Ice and Fire, are more similar to how it was depicted in those earlier seasons when Stannis was there. It's dark and gloomy and you're why would anyone live here?
What if Dragonstone is amorphous to its current ruler, so it came alive when a real Targaryen was there? That's the real Stone Dragon Awakening, is Dragonstone actually becomes a fun place to live. I bet when Dany lands in the books, crops start growing, I don't know, sheeps pop out of the ground, all of a sudden it's the most fertile thing.
Yeah, I know it's definitely portrayed like Minas Morgul in fan art and stuff. I mean, it looks just like some sort of horrible City of the Dead type thing. But yeah, you're right. It did feel
and in the official
livable.
Art.
In the World of Ice and Fire, the back flap I think is Dragonstone, or the front flap. I can't remember.
I kind of get a feeling when we've been watching Game of Thrones in the past that you see sort of rooms in places, and it's very obviously there's they're just sets off somewhere. With Dany's walk and the way they set it up, you could really feel consistently where they were on the island and in relation to each other. It's a thing they don't do a great job of in other places. When they're walking around Winterfell around the yard, I don't really know where that is in relation to the Great Hall or the crypts or the Weirwood. They're just kind of walking around a circular set kind of thing. And Dragonstone, they really made come alive with how they established the geography of the place. The rest of it, Dragon Pit was fine. I didn't think much of the map room. I thought that was just the new Tywin's study. They just needed a new place for Cersei. They do that a lot in King's Landing. They choose a different room each season. But
that's true.
The way the geography worked was it felt more, well, this is kind of a complaint a lot of people had. It felt more teleporty. It was like we were just sort of bouncing from place to place real fast. And it's a complaint people have about the earlier seasons. We even talked about how like, oh, this character is just like walking for 5 years from this place to that place. But you really get the scale and how far away they are. And it made this season, everything felt very smashed together just from the way they portrayed it.
I feel like that's a good way to transition to talk about the teleportation.
So we're going to kind of slowly start to wrap into just our final season thoughts. And the last thing I want to talk about with production is the actual production schedule and the actual production output, which is we had a longer break between seasons. They shortened it down to 7 episodes that were much, that were longer on average. And I think they hit their 2 longest episodes within the context of season 7. I think that's probably where the biggest discussion was this season in terms of fandom was the pacing of Game of Thrones too fast? Did they speed things up too much? Or was it just right? Or is it's been slowly making itself faster. It's been building a momentum towards this kind of speed. So maybe we should take it, do you think 7 episodes was the right choice here? Because personally, I do think with what they chose to do, they could have gotten 10, 50-minute episodes out of it if they wanted to.
Yeah,
they could have done 10, 50-minute episodes, but technically we have the same amount of time as in a full season. It's that the way they structured it as 7 episodes. So the question then is for me not necessarily how many episodes, but how they've decided to chart and lay out the way they've told the story. Or maybe it would have been like this even if they had done 10 episodes, and it's just that there are so many things crammed into it. These are
right.
But like it's technically the same amount of time.
But not all at once.
And because at times they do try to make the episodes a coherent set, and they have better success at times than others. But I do think that's a fair point that they do have. They're essentially working probably with around the same, because an average season probably comes in a little short of 9 hours if you consider most are about 50 minutes. So I'm pretty sure this season was right around there, maybe a little less than that. So maybe that's not that fascinating a question whether it's 7 versus 10. But does that?
I guess like the thing that I always ended up saying in basically every Quill and Tankard was like, gosh, I wish there was like 10 to 20 minutes more of space in this episode, which kind of adds up to like an 8th episode by the time you get to the end of the season. Like there were, for every episode we saw, I always felt like there were 1 or 2 scenes that would have just sort of given it a little bit more fat on its bones and kind of fleshed things out a little bit more than what we got. That I don't know if that means that it would have been an 11-hour season, that like if it would have been longer than usual with just 8 long episodes or something, but I don't know. I felt like there was more material in there that they could have used without making it seem to stretch out too long or drag on forever.
I think we can easily point to the Winterfell and the Sansa Arya rift as if that maybe had 2 more scenes and maybe remove the scene with the fake faces or whatever that was.
Why are you bringing this up? Oh.
Because I hate you all and you must suffer with me. But yeah, I definitely think those are things I could have used a little more screen time with. But let's actually go into the pacing and how fast, we cut out a lot of the travelogue scenes or chapters, as we call them in the books. Do you think something was lost doing that? Do you think something might have been gained? Do you think it created a sense of momentum or the things that were spiraling towards a finish? What are your general thoughts on how that worked as a mechanic?
Yeah, I thought the pacing was way too fast, and while it's a benefit that within these longer episodes they got to tell a more coherent story, it also kind of felt like they needed to wrap things up in that story a lot faster than they normally would. They didn't want to push anything off for another episode. So things like Michael was saying that were cut, these more extraneous parts, obviously just got pushed off because they needed to complete this episode's arc instead of having it more a cohesive story throughout the whole thing. They kind of went in 2-episode pairings, this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
They would set up all the action and they'd knock it down the next one, and they just did that a bunch, and then we got to the last one.
And yeah, going off of what you said and the question earlier of like 7 versus 10, they did that in a lot of episodes except for the one where they didn't, and that's the one that people took the most umbrage with, which is episode 6, where they wrapped up the entire going to the North storyline in one episode. So then it becomes a question for me about how you compose the story. Like, as you were saying, it was many insular ones as opposed to one cohesive one. And so there's this thing in like poetry, also in music, the idea of the rest, right? Had they pushed off Daenerys' arrival to maybe the next episode, granted, I don't know how it would have taken a lot of restructuring of how they did the last episode. Maybe it wouldn't have been only 7 episodes. I don't know. Could that restructuring have then heightened that sense of suspense, created, because there's that gap in between when the audience gets the resolution, creates the sense of more time having transpired so that people take less issue with how quickly Daenerys comes, and it feels less like it was too easy because they're able to space that out in the audience's perception with like the delivery.
That's a great point. Yeah, because it for 6 seasons, I would say we've had a much slower pace. I mean, you look at like season 3 or whatever, and Rob's storyline in season 3, for example, he arrives at Harrenhal to find it wrecked in episode 1, and then sort of meanders for like 8 episodes. And there's, he comes up with this plan to take Casterly Rock, but he's going to Winterfell, and it's these very slow scenes, and it's just him, slowly marching to his death, obviously. But so you look at that sort of pace in an earlier season, where it's a lot of very slow scenes that are good, but they're not these big set pieces. And then you jump to like the Beyond the Wall episode with the Magnificent Seven, and you have like a whole season arc happening in one. What would have been a season arc in a previous season happening in one episode. I think it's easy to get whiplash from that as an audience, and maybe it's why the suspension of disbelief was so hard for that episode, is because it kind of felt relentless. It was like, oh my god, no wait, I'm just getting my mind around this latest thing. I can't keep up.
It's one of those things where, in isolation, maybe, you give a pass on 1 or 2 of those things, but it's just at a point where they just keep happening. It's hard to, keep... Yeah. You can pick apart any, fictional work and say, oh, this specific part, but it just, when they're kind of that blatant and that rapid fire, like, congested or whatever, concentrated rather, into a short space of time, it just seems that much more glaring or whatever.
Right.
So, and this is a really minor aspect of production, but I really miss how the episodes used to be titled.
Yes.
Like, and I think you guys have mentioned it, but like, they used to draw from phrases, like Kiss by Fire or Dark Wings, Dark Words. And I mean, I haven't read the books in a while, but even off the top of my head, I can think of, Sword Without a Hilt, or there's just so many different turns of phrase that could have made great, that would have been great for the, the spoils of, or the Queen's Justice or things like that. And, I just kind of miss that, because now the episode is either the location or like the main character. Like, it's less something, because it was almost like in an episode like Kiss by Fire, it's almost like a thesis for the episode. And it's kind of like all these disparate plot threads tied together to that. And now, I mean, perhaps, an episode like Beyond the Wall, it does all tie together, but there's no depth there. That's very surface level. This is what happened. So
it's like the Battle of the Bastards title. I mean, I think it comes.
There's nothing else there.
That can be included. Yeah, it's the Battle of the Bastards. It's not, I don't know, literally anything else.
See, that's where I think that battle was lost, because there is a phrase for that in the books. It's the Bastard of Winterfell. And when you had Ramsay on the opposite of Jon, that would have been the perfect title for that episode.
Exactly.
I never thought about it. Wow.
I'm 100% sure I tweeted that before the season 6 episodes were titled. Because everyone's like, it's going to be Battle of the Bastards. And I'm like, no, it'll be, it'll be the Bastard of Winterfell because they're very clever with their titles and stuff. And
They were. Yeah.
Just like the time that they named that, what was it, season 3 finale, Misha.
Misa.
Yeah.
Wait, was that Misa and then
Misa?
And I was like, yeah, it's gonna have a double entendre in that it's gonna be about Daenerys. It's
wait.
Back Lady Stoneheart. Oh, that was where my thought was going.
They did that for 3 straight finales because then the 4th season was The Children, and then the 5th one was Mother's Mercy, which I didn't even know at the time is an appendix also known as For Lady Stoneheart, which...
Yeah, Mother Merciless.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, we're gonna bring every time. I was like, we're bringing back Stoneheart.
This season,
Stoneheart.
she's coming.
She's gonna show up in the season 8 finale, and that's gonna be... Yeah, I got nothing else on that. Actually, she'll be the very last scene, and then the spin-off will be what has Lady Stoneheart been doing while...
Oh, man.
And then
It'll be the Better Call Saul of this show.
Better Call...
Stoneheart.
But yeah, so and I think that kind of touches on the bigger issues, production wise that led into kind of the bigger, more critical issues that we talked about as a fandom and as a critical audience of Game of Thrones. So kind of with all that said, maybe what you felt about the season overall. We can use your avocados to grapefruit analogy if you'd like.
I don't remember that scale.
Eliana's scale is very different. It's how much she
Eliana
likes
has a
them.
weird scale.
Well, it's just based, as opposed to the objective truths, it's about my very subjective enjoyment of each individual fruit.
Right, okay.
Which is publicly available and everyone knows that, yeah.
So
I provide rationale.
I think holistically, like when we're talking about this season, what seems to be the general thread is that the show is now a show that's about the like what the big spectacle of the week is. We're tuning in to see the dragon attack or the white standoff or the meeting of all the characters in the dragon pit. I would count that as a big set piece kind of thing. And I think that's what season 8 is going to be. It's going to be 6 episodes where each episode is going to be like this massive battle or council or conflict of some sort. But because of that, what you're getting is, sort of more isolated episodes where a lot of stuff happens all at once. And it's almost like each one's an individual action movie or something. And the longer term threads, like the Winterfell storyline, kind of suffer for it. Because they just have to sort of spin their wheels until it's time for their turn in the action movie train, I guess. I don't know what the metaphor there is. They have to wait for their turn in the loot train to be burned, if you know what I'm saying. So if I had to give season 7 a rating on the objective or highly subjective fruit-based scale, whatever it is we're calling it, I can't even remember the rankings. I don't know. I'm tempted to give
dingoes?
it apples to dingoes.
That's it.
I'm tempted to give it an apple, if I'm being honest, because for all of the issues we talked about, and there were a lot of issues, whether it was logistical stuff like episode 6, or the writing and the Winterfell storyline being inconsistent, I was so looking forward to each week of Game of Thrones. I was like, oh, this is gonna be fun. Like, I'm gonna sit down, I'm gonna watch like a fun ass hour of television. I know I'm gonna sit down and enjoy it. And maybe that's because they're not really trying to like grapple with the same kinds of things they did in season 5 when the show was a lot harder to watch and I would argue less good. But at least I'm enjoying it. Is kind of how I feel about it. Like the loot train battle, loved it. Watching the whites, watching Sandor throw rocks at whites, I was like, yeah, that's great. That's hilarious. Bring it on. So for pure entertainment value, I kind of want to give it like a high score. A solid, maybe like a Granny Smith apple. Does that sort of capture the essence of what it's kind of tart?
That's a good apple.
Now we need a scale within a scale of we have
all
apples.
apples.
Okay. I can't wait till we rank the dingoes and what's the best dingo and what's the bad dingo.
Yeah, BRB.
How many dingoes do you know?
Is there more than one?
I don't even know one dingo.
Are there dingoes in the village? All right, so that's my...
I'm trying to think about a food that I am okay with. But, because, like, after, like, it's been, like, a month, I'm like, yeah, it's alright. So I'm trying to think of a food that's not, like, my favorite food, but that I still, eat and like. Give me a moment.
Roast neeps.
I actually really like beets and neeps and stuff. So, hold on, come back to me. I'm thinking about food.
Well, I mean, this is most of Maester Monthly at this point. Eliana thinking about food while we talk about other things.
Every day of my life, actually. Let me think.
All right. Do you want me to go while you're thinking about this?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
I'm thinking.
I was thinking about this a lot during the last month, and sort of thinking about the divide in the fandom between how many people didn't like it and all that kind of things. And I think it was the Rogue One of Game of Thrones. I think it was extremely fun to watch, like the Battle of Scarif and getting to see Darth Vader just maul those guys in the ship, and how it just sort of jumped around a lot, and the action was there. But it was a very different kind of enjoyment than if you're a hardcore book fan than you're used to. I was talking to Sue from Watchers on the Wall about this, and there's a lot of extraneous things in A Song of Ice and Fire that were not included in Game of Thrones. Like we were talking about earlier, like Jane Poole or Lady Stoneheart or Aegon. These are not things that are moving the plot in the direction towards the end of it, but they're things people love. And Game of Thrones has largely removed a lot of those. So it's kind of a weird thing where it seems like a lot of the fandom has latched onto these weird little parts of the story they really love, but Dan and Dave have gotten rid of. So if that's what you love, then Game of Thrones will not live up to it. But I'm just going along for the ride. I'm there for Vader. I'm there for the two Imperial destroyers hitting each other and falling into the shield thing. Like, I know it's not the best writing in the world, and it's not the same part of my brain that the books excite, but it's still very fun. So I would give it probably like what's a fruit I really like, but like not all the time? Probably like watermelon.
Watermelon.
I think watermelon.
Watermelon's so good.
It's actually my favorite fruit, so way to ruin everything.
But I associate it with like barbecues and drinking beer.
Okay.
Totally.
I make a fantastic watermelon salad, and if you come visit me in the summer, I will make some.
I'm going to make me watermelon salad.
Yeah.
So
anyway.
that's my ranking. Watermelons at a barbecue.
Is a watermelons at a barbecue.
Yep.
Okay. That's a great... Eliana, have you made any progress on your...
Yeah, Matt inspired me. So, as opposed to like how I really like watermelons. But so, a fruit that I like, but I don't love. So it's like, you know how in 10 Things I Hate About You, she's like, I like my Skechers, but I love my Prada backpack. So a fruit that I like is like cantaloupe or honeydew.
Honeydew is the money melon. So.
Honeydew is the best.
I don't know. Honeydew's really good as a frozen yogurt. So maybe I'll... Whoa. All right, so cantaloupe then. Cantaloupe.
Okay.
Cantaloupe.
I would say that really my thoughts echo Michael a lot because I still really enjoyed it, and I love picking it apart, but it's a picking apart of love, really. But one thing I kind of look back at, and it kind of informs the season, especially kind of rewatching it recently removed from it, is there's that quote that was kind of much ballyhooed about how David and Dan described it as a 73-hour movie, Game of Thrones as being one long movie. And I remember TV criticism, Twitter, were like, oh, how could they say that? The long lost art of the episode and blah, blah, blah. Like, they were really mad. And I was listening to the Storm of Spoilers podcast, and one of the hosts on there had mentioned, I rewatched Game of Thrones Season 7 in one sitting, as if it were one movie. And it just feels like a lot of the things that he had felt were issues with pacing, or the things we talk about here, kind of fall away when you kind of view it as a movie. And, movies generally have much quicker pacings than...
Yeah.
And something that maybe we get lost in when we're still reading these, really hardcore Song of Ice and Fire University Tumblr metas about what's going to happen in the last 2 books. There is the perfect cromulent, expectation that A Song of Ice and Fire is going to hew more towards classic high fantasy with an epic finish. I think it's going to have George's nuance that is not being depicted, but it could be a little bit closer. We might not have full Eldritch apocalypse and, all these potential subplots that people are talking about. It could, possibly economize. I mean, George has to economize at some point, and he talks about how viewpoints are converging, so, some characters are going to... So maybe, I mean, perhaps it's not as far off the books. I mean, I don't think the beat-by-beat points are going to be there, but perhaps it's, not as far off as we think it is. So, if I had to give it something, it wasn't my favorite season, so it doesn't get the watermelon.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I'm going to give it a banana just because it's not my favorite fruit, but I eat a banana every day. Like, it sustains me, it feeds me, it nourishes me. And
that's good.
I need it so bad. And even if the banana's a little overripe or a little, underripe, I eat a
lot of food that I shouldn't eat. But
this is accurate.
But so I just wanted to revisit what you were saying about D&D, describing it as like a 73-hour movie. And that's like not far off from how George R. R. Martin obviously structures these. Like, technically, if it's a 73-hour movie and that's one season, that's a lot of the seasons have been one of the books. So it's one thing. And George has said that he doesn't necessarily see A Song of Ice and Fire as 5 books. He sees it as one large book and story.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think you start seeing that, I think the first 2 books are, especially the first book and a half are pretty much linear. But then, A Storm of Swords basically starts out with the forward that, hey, these Jaime chapters happen before the end of it. There's a little bit of time futzing going around with the beginning of Storm of Swords. Like, that first Jaime chapter happens before Blackwater and all that stuff. So that's where it kind of loses, this is a concrete set of events, then concrete set of events. It starts to slowly mingle, and then obviously Feast Dance just completely,
Yeah.
spills 3 different puzzles onto the floor and makes you have to assemble all 3 of them, in a short period of time. So,
yeah. No, it's true. They do inform the show and the books. They're long continuities. They're not serial. They're not episodic individual adventures. They're one big thing, one large Song of Ice and Fire.
Oh my god.
Of course, I think the real Song of Ice and Fire was the friends we made along the way.
Wow, that's so beautiful.
No, okay. So
that's adorable.
Sorry, real quick. That was a Granny Smith, a watermelon, what was yours? Cantaloupe, and a banana.
That's a pretty good fruit salad right there.
Right? That's a nice little... Yeah, I would eat those for dessert. For sure.
Yum.
Okay, well, I think that's about it for this episode of Maester Monthly. As always, you can find us on Twitter, @Maester Monthly. You can find us on YouTube. Our channel is Maester Monthly. We are on Podbean. We are on iTunes. We are on Google Play. Are we on Podbean? I said that, but I don't know what Podbean is.
No,
we are on iTunes.
We're not
on Google Play.
Wait,
get it out of here.
Podbean exist? I've never even heard of it.
That's what
I think
we're launching a new service.
Davos Fingers is on Podbean.
I was gonna say I think it's a host. Yeah, I think we have a Podbean account. Anyway, we're on iTunes. We are on Google Play. We're on another one that we're on Stitcher. There we go. I finally remembered it. And of course, you can find all of these links on our WordPress, which is www.maestermonthly.wordpress.com, because we're too cheap to pay for hosting. And of course, we are on YouTube. You can always find us on YouTube. And on YouTube, you get to see our lovely editor Aaron's visual masterpieces, which he adds to each episode. So I always recommend checking that out. And of course, you can find our guest, Manu, on Twitter as well, @ManuclearBomb, which the link will be in the description. So give him a follow. He's very funny and smart.
And you
cool
can also find
and nice.
Manu on A Scene of Ice and Fire. Don't forget about that.
Yeah,
that's right.
I guess I can give you my full plugs. Yeah, most of my stuff ends up on Twitter. It's at @MaNuclearBomb. I am podcasting, recapping Game of Thrones, scene by scene, quote unquote, but we usually do a couple of scenes together per episode. We're going to be picking back up shortly. We're on season 1, episode 5, The Lion and the Wolf, or The Wolf and the Lion, whichever. And then all my Game of Thrones episode recaps you can find at draysbay.com, which is a baseball site for the Tampa Bay baseball team. Don't ask. And I have other assorted pop culture writings at screenfellows.com.
There we go. Okay.
Those are some plugs.
I have been one of your hosts. Those are some plugs, yeah. That's better than our usual drivel that we have on here. Yeah. I've been one of your hosts, Michael, also known as Bookshelfstud.
And I've been another one of your hosts, Eliana, also known as Glass Table Girl.
And I've been your other host, JoeMagician, also known as Matt.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Redditors, for creating content for us to read on here. And stay tuned for the next episode of Maester Monthly.